Chapter 313. It was the countryside surrounding the city. Yang Qindong's intention was to establish himself in the capital and make a name for himself. Then, he would establish enough deterrence so that no one would dare to look down on him and make trouble for him. It seemed that he had done enough of these things. Whether it was defeating the Walla army, beating up the Japanese envoy, or bombarding Haging Street, no one would dare to try anything behind his back. Since it was stable, then what he had done was more or less done. If he were a little more forceful, he would have to confront the imperial power, and the consequences would be unpredictable. At the very least, Yang Qindong, who lacked military power and influence, had not thought about what to do in the capital. In the society of the time, news spread very slowly. The Ming dynasty was still very powerful, and the imperial power still had a deep influence. Changing all of this was not something that could be done in a single day. It was said that heroes were born in troubled times. In the face of the great Ming dynasty, which was not in chaos, many people would find it difficult to do much even if they had all the strength in their bodies. Logically speaking, Yang Qindong could have become a wealthy man in a peaceful world. With his ability and influence, he was completely capable of doing this. After all, no one could hold such an important position in the hearts of both Zhu Qiyu and Qi Zhen. But since he had come to this world and knew what would happen in the future, Yang Qindong did not want to see his descendants being bullied and trampled on by foreigners. He wanted the health of his descendants, the moment when the Han people reached the apex of the world. With such a grand dream, how difficult would it be to put it into practice? In the future, even if one was rich enough to rival an entire country, it would still be impossible to achieve this goal. With the development of communications and the binding of interests, every action of any country was equivalent to living under a magnifying glass. If any country wanted to do something out of line, they would become the enemy of the world. Any country that was too strong could be labeled as a hegemon. But this was not the case now. With the lack of information, there were even cases where people did not know of each other's existence. Even if they did know, it was very difficult to understand the situation, and it could be called a complete darkness. At this moment, if a force or country suddenly rose up, it would be very difficult for others to join forces to resist. This was an opportunity. With these thoughts in mind, Yang Qindong boarded the carriage and returned to the Yang Manor. The task of cleaning up Blackwell Street was handed over to Sun Pe, one of the commanders of the Warden's Office of the Five Cities, and Wang Bo, the deputy of the Supreme Court. There should not be any problems. The next step was to calculate the results of the battle, and then how to make the data look better. Anyone with a little brain would know what to do. For Yang Qindong, this operation was more of a deterrent, a timely show of the tiger's fangs to warn some people. As for how Zhu Qiyu, who had begun to counterattack because of this matter, would change the defense, he would just treat it as a big show to watch. In any case, no matter who it was, he believed that they wouldn't touch him unless they had absolute confidence. Of course, he did it on purpose this time. He wanted to find an excuse for himself and for Zhu Qiyu. He believed that when the right time came, he would be able to grasp it. Before the opportunity appeared, Yang Qindong still focused on the Yang Academy. If everything went well, he would probably leave the capital for a period of time. Before that, how to train the first batch of students was a must. Just like a tiger patrolling the mountains, Yang Qindong returned to the Yang family manor after showing off his prowess. From all kinds of information, it seemed that he was once again the head of the academy with only a few dozen students. When this news spread, many of the important officials were puzzled. Among the officials of the great Ming dynasty, Yang Qindong was definitely an exception and a different existence. Only the Confucian school was respected, so the status of scholars and learned people was far higher than the other common people, merchants, craftsmen, and soldiers. Under the policy of using literature to suppress force, the status of scholars in society was even higher. They seemed to be able to casually point out the country and make judgments about the affairs of the world. Coupled with the fact that they were from the same sect, it was easier for them to band together. This led to the situation where the scholar officials and the emperor ruled the world. Yang Qindong was the descendant of Yang Rong, the son of the three Yangs. Even if he didn't know anything, with his status, he wouldn't have a bad life. As long as he had a little ability, he would be able to sit high in the imperial court. It was even possible for him to repeat the past glory of the Yang clan. This was the so-called good birth. However, Yang Chendong had a good birth and was extremely capable. He had even made great contributions and was greatly indebted to both the northern and southern emperors of the great Ming dynasty. If such a person were to sit high in the imperial court, he would be a symbol of a boundless future. Once he had enough experience, it was not impossible for him to become an important official or even a powerful official. It could be said that his future was bright, but he showed that he was uninterested in the imperial court. All he cared about every day was doing business and teaching students. He didn't teach orthodox Confucianism, nor did he teach the Analects of Confucius, the 4 books, or the 5 classics. Instead, he included magic, chemistry, physics, geography, and other things that were called unorthodox at that time. Under the rule of Confucianism, the status of merchants was very low. Even if you were rich, even very rich, if you didn't have enough background, everything you had would become a gift to others. This was the reason why many famous merchants would still be very respectful when facing aristocratic families who were far less wealthy than them. However, it was this business that wasn't recognized by mainstream society that Yang Chendong was willing to dive into and play with. Doing business, teaching unorthodox methods, all these actions really gave people a feeling of not doing proper work. This was what made the important officials, and even the acting sect master, Zhu Qizhen, unable to understand. Sometimes, the emperor who had stolen his brother's throne couldn't help but wonder what the Duke of Loyalty and Courage that he had bestowed upon him actually wanted. Was he really uninterested in the imperial court? If that was the case, wasn't his targeting a little too excessive? Wasn't he being too sensitive? If even the emperor was thinking this, the other officials were even less able to understand. As the one being suspected, Yang Chendong didn't seem to care about what others thought. After returning to the academy, he became a serious and solemn teacher, diligently teaching his students. His 4 wives and concubines continued to enter the capital that morning. Those who were practicing in the immortal abode, and those who were taking in the women on the streets were still doing so. It was as if they were completely unaffected by the bombardment, as if the incident at Blackwell Street had never happened. It was precisely this seemingly ordinary behavior that left everyone scratching their heads in confusion. After thinking about it for a while, everyone turned their attention back to their own matters. Although the bombardment in the middle of the night was still there, it was only aimed at Blackwell Street. Since it didn't have anything to do with them, they naturally went back to what they were doing. Only a few people with deep foresight could vaguely see that this young Duke of Great Ming's loyal and courageous actions were all practical matters. Developing commerce was accumulating money. Yang Bao was controlling public opinion. The immortal abode was expanding its influence. The Yang clan's bank was hoarding money, and even the Yang clan's academy was teaching pragmatism. It was just that the majority of people couldn't see it clearly. But regardless, the storm gradually calmed down. Some of the officials who had thought that something major was about to happen breathed a sigh of relief. More attention was placed on the matter of changing the guard of the army. When it came to the mobilization of hundreds of thousands of troops, there were a lot of things that needed to be done. A lot of money needed to be spent, and there were also a lot of empty seats. How to curry favor with them and get what they wanted was what the officials should consider and do. With Zhu Qiyu's approval and powerful officials like Shi Hong and Yi Ming taking charge, the matter of changing the guard of the army began to unfold with great vigor. Squad after squad of soldiers walked out of the capital, and squad after squad of soldiers entered the capital in an orderly fashion. This display of the great Ming's military strength allowed even more officials and nobles to relax and enjoy their lives. But in the wake of all this, countless families had been destroyed, and countless people had been lost. The officials turned their attention away from Yang Chendong, but there were still some people who paid attention to this person. In an unremarkable Changshun Inn in the capital, in the dimly lit backyard, a tall man was standing there, listening to a man whose eyes occasionally flashed with killing intent. Big Brother Yin, my big brother and third brother died too unjustly this time. You have to uphold justice for us. The shorter man, who was dressed like a wanderer of the Jianghu, had said many things before concluding with these words. He seemed to be weeping about something. Unjustly? The person who was addressed as Big Brother Yin uttered one word. It was unknown whether he was sighing, or speaking from his emotions. He shook his head lightly and continued, "You two brothers went up against the Duke of Loyalty and Courage of the great Ming dynasty, who is also known as the God of War. Since you did it, you should have expected such an ending. Yes, we were careless in this matter. But no matter what, he shouldn't have been so ruthless. It's a pity that my elder brother was killed by the bombardment in the secret passage, and my third brother was killed by a flintlock. If I don't do something, I won't have the face to see my brothers after I die." The scholar continued to speak. He didn't seem to want to give up. At this point, everyone should know that this scholar was the second master of the Blackwater gang, Wu Yong, who was also known as the military advisor. He also thought that this operation would be too challenging, so he made 3 preparations. However, he never expected that the other party had no intention of tangling with him at all. Instead, the other party used an advanced firearm and ended everything with a single push. Chapter 3:14. Yesterday at this time, the 3 brothers were still drinking and eating meat together, imagining the beautiful future after this deal was completed. But today, he was the only one left alive. How could he be satisfied? As for the brother standing in front of him, his name was Yin Tao. He had always had a good relationship with the boss of the Blackwater gang, Hu Huai. It was said that boss who had saved his life before. Now, this person had an identity that could not be ignored. He was the chief arrester of the Ministry of Justice. The arrester was the so-called criminal police of the Public Security Bureau. Usually, such a person was not only good at fighting, but also very smart. And to be able to stand out in this team and become the chief arrester, it could be seen how good his fighting skills and wisdom were. Even in this environment where officials and nobles gathered in the capital, the identity of the chief arrester of the Ministry of Justice was also well known and could not be ignored. It was precisely because of his power that Wu Yong found Yin Tao after escaping from the attack of the Wolf's Fang to avenge his brothers. Of course, this time his opponent was Yang Chendong. Wu Yong knew that it was not realistic to only rely on the previous kindness to persuade him. So when he asked Yin Tao to come out, he also made another preparation, which was to give him a big gift. In this world, living was nothing more than living for nothing more than a mouth. Under this condition, how to live a better life, more face, and more status would become a higher level of pursuit. People like Yin Tao naturally had face and even some power. But because of the importance of his position, there were many people who had their eyes on him. There were not many ways to live a more luxurious life in terms of money. Wu Yong saw this point, and this time, he used it as a breakthrough point. Seeing that Yin Tao did not agree to avenge his elder brother and third brother, he gritted his teeth and said, "Big brother Yin, as long as you can avenge my elder brother and younger brother, the Blackwater gang is willing to give you all the benefits that we have accumulated over the years." Hearing the benefits, Yin Tao seemed to be confused. But the fast twitching of the corner of his eyes was still noticed by the clever Wu Yong. "That's right. It's the gold and silver that we've plundered over the years. Adding it all together, it's about 800,000 taels. As long as we can take revenge, all of this will belong to Brother Yin." 800,000 taels was undoubtedly a huge sum of money. Although Yin Tao was one of the chief constables of the Ministry of Justice, and people often gave him gifts, it was still a lot less than this amount. No one would be moved by it. On the other side, Wu Yong had already used his trump card. Naturally, he wouldn't stop there. He continued to say, "Big brother Yin, although the matter between you and our Blackwater gang is secretive, it's not like we don't have any clues. If you really want to find it, it's possible. With that loyal and courageous Duke's character, he must have found out about our previous relationship. Would he spare me? But with these 800,000 taels of silver, it will be different. You can no longer be a constable. You can go far away at any time and find a place where no one knows you to be a rich man. Wouldn't that be great?" On one hand, there were threats, and on the other hand, there were benefits. It was a game of steamed buns and sticks, and in Yin Tao's ears, there was no doubt that there were bolts of thunder. Even if he wanted to peacefully deal with the matter in front of him, he probably couldn't. After an unknown amount of time, perhaps it was very fast, perhaps it was the time to brew a cup of tea, or perhaps it was an hour, he finally heard the sound of a long exhalation. Obviously, he had already made a decision. This matter is troublesome. You can stay here first. Don't worry, this is one of the strongholds under my jurisdiction. No one will find this place." Yin Tao agreed. Wu Yong's face was immediately filled with joy as he said, "I'll listen to Big Brother Yin. I'll stay here." Wu Yong was confident that Yin Tao wouldn't do anything to him. He didn't see any benefits, nor did he see any other brothers. Who knew if he had left any backup plans outside? Once something happened, his relationship with the Black Water Gang would be exposed to the world. Relying on this, Yin Tao naturally didn't dare to have any devious thoughts. Even if there was one, it could only appear when he killed Yang Qindong and got the money to escape to the end of the world. Seeing that Wu Yong was so tactful, Yin Tao nodded his head in satisfaction. "But since we have to make preparations, we can't do without the silver tails. Don't worry, Big Brother Yin. I'll arrange for someone to send the silver tails over tonight. Is 400,000 taels enough?" "It's enough," Yin Tao happily replied. In a sense, these 400,000 taels of silver were taken from the 800,000 taels that he deserved. According to the rules of the martial arts world, he had to collect half of it as a deposit. From the looks of it, Yin Tao was really prepared to help. After discussing the matter and appeasing Wu Yong, Yin Tao left Changshan Inn. However, he didn't go in the direction of the Ministry of Justice. Instead, he walked a few rounds on the streets as if he was bored. After confirming that no one had seen him, he went in the direction of the Yu residence. Yu Shiyue, the current Minister of Justice, was deeply trusted by the current emperor. He should have had a bright future and limitless glory. However, because of a conflict with the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Qindong, his grandson, Yu Xiong, was sentenced to death. His eldest grandson, Yu Yuanbi, also suffered in prison. In addition, Su Yozhan was assigned to the Ministry of Justice as the left assistant minister, with the intention of replacing Yu Shiyue. The Yu residence, which was supposed to be bustling with people and carriages, became much quieter. After all, he was still the Minister of Justice. And there were still many officials who came to visit him every day. By the time Yin Tao arrived, he could only enter from the side door. The head constable of the Ministry of Justice. It sounded like a very prestigious title, but in the minister's residence, it was just a small official. If Yin Tao wasn't someone who was promoted by Yu Shiyue and had come to the Yu residence before, and the gatekeeper knew him, it would be difficult for him to enter through the side door. Even if he entered the Yu residence, he might not be able to see the minister. He came to a slightly remote side hall and waited for more than 2 hours. After drinking a few pots of tea, he finally heard the sound of footsteps outside the door. "Master is receiving guests in the front hall. Please wait a moment, Constable Yin," the Yu residence steward who was in charge of leading him said with a formal smile. Okay. Yin Tao knew that the steward was just being polite on the surface. Regardless of whether the minister was really receiving guests or not, if someone of his status wanted to see the minister, it was necessary to wait a little longer. This was the place where he could show his prestige. Speaking of which, Yin Tao's skills were not bad. Even in the Jianghu, he was quite famous. It was not an exaggeration to call him a first-class master. However, under the environment that emphasized culture and suppressed martial arts, not to mention a constable with good skills, even a general who killed on the battlefield would not have any status in the minister's residence. This was the rule under the influence of the Confucian school. Martial artists were not valued and were seen as simple-minded and physically developed. Such people had no future and could even be the main factor in civil strife. Merchants were suppressed because they were seen as people who only cared about profit. Such people, if there was milk, then there was mother. They had no father, country, or family in their eyes. For profit, they would do anything and betray anyone. Speaking of which, Yin Tao sat in a side hall and stayed there for more than half an hour. However, he sat upright and there was no trace of anxiety on his face. It could be seen that he was a person who could achieve great things. Time passed little by little, and there was a sound of footsteps in the distance. Hearing the sound of footsteps, Yin Tao quickly stood up with a very respectful look. However, when the person appeared, he raised his head and there was a slight surprise in his eyes. "Young Master Yu? That's right, it's me. Grandfather knew that you were here, but there was something he couldn't get away from, so he let me come." Haha, Constable Yin, take a seat. The person who came was Yunb, Yushiyue's most admired eldest grandson. In order to train him, he would usually be in charge of receiving guests when there was no important matter. This was also a method of training. The minister did not appear, but Yunb did. Yin Tao was somewhat disappointed. However, when he thought about how Yu Xiong had died at the hands of the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Qindong, he had a glimmer of hope in his heart. Perhaps this person wanted revenge more than him. As a hot-blooded young man, he should be easier to fool than a minister like Yu Shiyue. After making up his mind, Yin Tao's expression became much calmer. He first sat down, then held a cup of tea and said casually, "Actually, this constable didn't come here for anything. I just thought that the 7th day of young Master Yu Xiong's death is coming, so I came to pay my respects." Suddenly, Yu Xiong's name was mentioned. Yu Xiong's death could be said to be the shame of the entire Yu family. Now that someone mentioned it in front of him, and only as a chief constable, Yunb's expression changed. He said with a livid face, "Yin Tao, what are you trying to do? Don't you want to work anymore?" "Young Master Yu, please calm down. Things are not what you think. In fact, this constable is here for this matter. Instead of keeping the matter of young Master Yu Xiong under wraps, it would be better to take revenge. That would be the only way to solve the problem. But I don't know if young Master Yu Xiong has the guts to do such a thing." As a chief constable, Yin Tao's ability to grasp people's hearts was very strong when interrogating criminals. This time, he used provocation to force Yunb to make a choice. "Revenge? Haha, you're just a lowly chief constable with an insignificant official position. How dare you speak of this lightly? Unless you have some ability?" Yunb could roughly guess Yin Tao's background. However, when he thought of Yang Qindong's power and ability, he still did not dare to do anything. Chapter 315. Just as young Master Yu said, this constable does have some ability. At least I still have some useful people in my hands. After saying all this with a smile on his face, Yin Tao suddenly leaned forward and said a name from his mouth. It was Wu Yong's name. The Black Water Gang had been wiped out overnight. Only the second in command, Wu Yong, had escaped. Now that they were in the middle of a large-scale manhunt, any smart person would be able to guess why Yin Tao suddenly mentioned this person. Oh! Yunb's expression instantly lit up. He finally knew why Yin Tao had come to find him. He really did have some confidence. Just as Yunb was thinking, Yin Tao's voice sounded in his ear again. "If the matter is done well, we can naturally take revenge. Even if it isn't done well, it has nothing to do with us. We won't lose anything. Besides, as long as the plan is well thought out, there shouldn't be any accidents in a surprise attack. After all, humans have flaws. Humans are made of flesh and blood. Swords and spears can take lives." "Not bad, not bad." Yunb laughed loudly, then pointed to the teacup on the table and said, "Big Brother Yin, please have some tea?" Yunb had changed the way he addressed Yin Tao from Constable Yin to Big Brother Yin. This was his way of expressing their closeness, and it also meant that he would support the other party. How could Yin Tao not feel it? He immediately laughed and drank from the teacup. "Good, let's have some tea together. Speaking of which, the tea in the minister's residence is really good. Haha, if Big Brother Yin likes it, you can bring some back later," Yunb said with a face full of enthusiasm. After that, the two of them lowered their heads and conspired for a long time. When Yin Tao left satisfied, he went straight to his grandfather's study. Yunb had made the decision on his own and agreed to cooperate with Yin Tao. This wasn't a whim, but because he knew that if the Yu family wanted to develop, Yang Qindong, this stumbling block, had to be kicked away. Otherwise, if they couldn't even protect themselves, how could they talk about spreading their name? After understanding all this, he predicted that even if his grandfather knew about this matter, he wouldn't object. Sure enough, he entered the study and explained to Yu Shiyue why Yin Tao came. The Minister of Justice was silent for a while before nodding. "Do things secretly. However, since we're going to make a move, we can't give the other party the slightest chance. You should also go and make some arrangements. If the time is right, you can add a stab. In short, it's fine if you don't make a move, but if you do, it must be a thunderous method." He never thought that his grandfather would put everything on the line and ask him to do it himself. Yu Yuanbi couldn't help but say excitedly, "Grandfather, don't worry. I'll make the arrangements right away. As long as there's a chance, I'll definitely make him suffer the pain of having his heart pierced by thousands of arrows." The reason why Yu Shiyue was so ruthless was naturally because the situation in the imperial court was already pressuring him. Especially after Su Yozhen became the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, this person wantonly bought people's hearts and had already begun to shake his authority in the Ministry of Justice. If he couldn't deal with the foreign enemy Yang Chendong, it wouldn't be long before his position as Minister of Justice would be useless. Since there was no way out, he could only take the initiative to attack. Yin Tao's arrival was no doubt tantamount to giving him a chance to make a move. Although there were risks, but wealth was originally sought in the midst of danger. How could one achieve great things without being ruthless? Moreover, after Yin Tao left the Yu residence, he went to contact Wu Yong. Yin Tao was like a walker walking in the dark. At night, he knocked on the door of Chengshan Inn and saw the second-in-command of the Black Water Gang, Wu Yong, who was waiting for news. Wu Yong was already burning with anxiety. He was even prepared to escape at any time because he really didn't know whether Yin Tao was reliable or not. Although he was indebted to this person in the past, it didn't prevent him from suddenly killing him. However, the moment he saw the tall Yin Tao appear, Wu Yong still looked very calm. At least on the surface, there wasn't the slightest hint of fear or terror. To be able to become one of the 4 chief constables of the Ministry of Justice, Yin Tao was not only skilled in martial arts, but also unusually quick-witted. He might have thought of something long ago, but just didn't want to say it. Tonight, he came here for business. He went to the home of the Minister of the Ministry of Justice and gained a lot. This time, he came here to tell him part of his plan. "Second Master Wu, I've decided to help you. Here's a list of materials. They are all bloody men in the Green Forest. They only recognize money and not people. How to persuade them to help you? You just have to work hard. But remember, if there is no accident, there will be an opportunity in a few days. Whether you can seize it or not depends on you." After putting down the information on the mercenaries in the capital, Yin Tao stayed for a while longer before leaving. He knew of Wu Yong's abilities, and he was confident that he would have no problem recruiting these men to work for him for the time being. As for the people and the materials, in fact, they were some bandits with names in the Ministry of Justice. Some of them even had bloody cases. Such people were the so-called scum of society. However, it was undeniable that these people had a clean background. Even if someone wanted to use them, it would only be a temporary exchange of power and money. No one would support them. This way, it could be guaranteed that when they were used, the news would not be leaked out quickly. Moreover, with Wu Yong's intelligence, he would not make things too clear. As long as he paid, he would let these people work for him. As for who he killed, those people would not know until the last moment. In a few days, Wu Yong should be able to do this. As the local boss of the underworld in the capital and the former second-in-command of the Black Water Gang, his abilities should not be underestimated. In 1451 AD, the second year of Jingtai of the Ming dynasty, the Miao people's uprising began. Huiming and Huiming were the princes of the Minzhuang king Zhu Yuanzhang, the 18th son of Zhu Yuanzhang. In the first year of Jingtai, 1450, Zhu Yuanzhang died, followed by Huiming. Huiming, the king of Guangdong, was brave and strong. His family, Duan Yuhong, was favored by the king because of his excellent skills. Later, Yu Libin said that Huiming was abnormal and should be the ruler of the world. Thus, Huiming started a rebellion. He made a fake imperial edict and sent Duan Yuhong, Ming Nung, and Chun Tianqing to the Miao people's territory. He used silver seals and gold coins to lure the Miao people to attack Wugong. After the Ming dynasty's southern emperor, Zhu Qizhen, heard the news, he sent the governor of Huguang, Wang Lai, and the chief military officer, Liang Luo, to suppress the rebellion. After Zhu Qizhen went through the Tumu incident, his personality became more gloomy and his methods became more ruthless. After he gained a foothold in the original capital of Nanjing, he began to reform the governance of officials and started to train soldiers. Courage after knowing shame. Because of his experience, Zhu Qizhen knew that the so-called under one, above all, under the Ming dynasty, and under the emperor's wisdom, were all fake. Only a strong military force and an abundant national treasury would be the true core of the country. In order to achieve this goal, he issued a series of orders, and the entire South began to expand the source of soldiers. Under the eyes of many, soldiers were forcefully arresting strong men, causing the originally rich South to be in a mess. Who knew how many families were torn apart because of this? Because of this, some scholars openly expressed their opposition. Some even said that this was clearly militaristic and not the way of a saint. In the past, the emperor had always been very tolerant of scholars. This was because many times, they represented the will of the people and the will of the world. If one offended them, it would be difficult to have a good reputation among the people, and there might even be chaos. However, Zhu Qizhen, who had a goal in mind, was ruthless this time. Any scholar who dared to talk about national affairs, especially those who criticized his actions, were all arrested. He did not hesitate to become enemies with some scholars because he wanted to restore the glory of the great Ming dynasty. He wanted to unify the north and south of the great Ming dynasty. He wanted to wash away the shame of his past. He wanted to be a wise ruler of a generation, a ruler of prosperity. In order to achieve his goal, he would do anything. It was also because of this that many scholars were implicated. Although some aristocratic families were still deeply rooted and were not implicated by this matter, they still had their own opinions. At this time, after King Ming succeeded the throne, he declared that the people of the world should be ruled by the people of the world. He declared that he wanted to become the ruler of the world. The difference between here and in history was that the Miao tribe leader Yang Wenba supported his actions. The reason was simple. Previously, when Zhu Qizhen recruited soldiers, he caused a lot of trouble in the south, which made Yang Wenba hate him. In addition, Zhu Qizhen was no longer the only ruler of the great Ming dynasty. In the north, there was still the existence of the substitute Zhu Qiyu, who was enough to compete with Zhu Qizhen. This greatly weakened Zhu Qizhen's strength. Therefore, Yang Wenba made a decision that was different from history. He supported the king of Minzhuang instead. With Yang Wenba's support, King Min's strength increased greatly. Wugong, which was located in the southwest of Hunan province, was broken through in 3 days. After winning the first battle and taking down King Min's emblem, he finally gained the recognition of some aristocratic families. After receiving some support in terms of gold, silver, and grain, his power increased. He had the potential to become the king of the south. When King Min's matter came out, Zhu Qizhen naturally flew into a rage. While sending troops, he also sighed in the palace. Zhu Qiyu took the throne when his life and death was uncertain. It could be said that there was a reason for this. Although Zhu Qiyu did not recognize him later, when he came to Nanjing to establish the South Ming dynasty, Zhu Qiyu did not do anything to stop him. To put it bluntly, Zhu Qiyu acknowledged his existence in private. On the surface, Zhu Qiyu still called him King Yu. This was something that could not be helped. However, who was Zhu Huijin? He was just a small descendant of King Minzhuang. How dare he call himself a king? This was touching his reverse scale. Even if there was internal friction, he would not let him make a big deal out of it. In the palace, Zhu Qizhen was not in a good mood. He was so tired that Empress Qian was also in a bad mood. Chapter 316. It was a common situation in the Great Ming dynasty at that time. Not to mention that Empress Qian had always loved Zhu Qizhen. If Empress Qian was worried, she would be more worried. Empress, His Majesty is talented and intelligent. You don't have to worry too much. A young eunuch was standing beside Empress Qian and speaking carefully. He was a eunuch who was not very old but had an extraordinary manner of speech. He was Mao Mu, the eunuch who had been indebted to Yang Qindong and was later ordered to follow Empress Qian out of the capital. Before the Timu incident, Mao Mu already had some status in the imperial harem. Zhu Qizhen's life was unknown, and the chief eunuch, Wang Zhan, died in the chaos. As a eunuch promoted by Wang Zhan, he was also implicated. It was only after he took out most of his wealth that he was able to save his life. It was not until Yang Qindong returned to the capital that everything became better. Later, he approached Empress Qian on behalf of Yang Qindong and finally came to Nanjing. After seeing Zhu Qizhen become the South Emperor, he became the most trusted eunuch of Empress Qian and had some status in Zhu Qizhen's heart. Seeing that his master, Empress Qian, was in a depressed mood. Mao Mu tried to explain carefully. Alas, His Majesty's fate is not good. Since he came to Nanjing, he has always wanted to be the master of prosperity, but things are not going well. Every time I see this, I feel uneasy. I always want to do something, but I am short-sighted. I can only work hard to deal with the affairs of the imperial harem and try not to let His Majesty worry. Empress Qin shook her head and was angry at herself. Speaking of which, Empress Qin did love Zhu Qijin very much. In history, she had done her best to protect her man, but she also had a tragic end. In this life, because of the appearance of Yang Qindong, she did not have to be so wronged. But because she loved Zhu Qijin too deeply, how could she be happy when Zhu Qijin was unhappy? Seeing that Empress Qin was in a bad mood, Mao Mu blinked and then said in a low voice, "Empress, in fact, the problem of Nanjiang is not that difficult. You just need to send an army and sweep it." Sweep away? Empress Qin trusted Mao Mu very much, so she was not angry because of the other party's arrogance. She just shook her head after listening. Although I don't know what political affairs are, I have heard that Zhu Huichen is now in contact with Rongkong Shiping Homubin, Duke Qian. In the name of jointly ruling the world, his power is getting stronger and stronger. Rongkong Shiping Homubin was a member of the Mu clan. They had been living in Yunnan for many years and had been helping the great Ming dynasty resist the covetous eyes of Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam until the end of the Ming dynasty. At the time when he was in the middle of the great Ming dynasty, he still had some strength. If he cooperated with Zhu Huihua, it would undoubtedly be like a heavy hammer smashing towards Zhu Qiyu. The politics of the southern Ming Empire would truly be in danger. As the head of the palace eunuchs, Mao Mu was second only to Chao Jixiang, who was favored by Zhu Qijin. He naturally knew about this matter. Hearing Empress Qin's words, he smiled. Empress need not worry. The Mu family's loyalty is not a problem. He will not walk together with a traitor like Zhu Huichen. Yes, His Majesty has also said this. Ben Gong also knows. But I heard that it is not peaceful there. Several small countries are beginning to stir. It is not easy for Rongkong Shiping Ho to suppress them. He is unable to send troops to help His Majesty quell the rebellion. Empress Qin first nodded as if sighing for Mu Bin's inability to send troops. But then she shook her head. Thinking that the current situation was not as she wished, she felt a bit sad. Since Rongkong Shiping Ho is unable to send troops, why not ask the Duke of Loyalty and Courage to help? Mao Mu seemed to speak emotionally. But after saying this, he quickly shut his mouth and knelt on the ground. Your Majesty, this subject misspoke. Facing Mao Mu's performance, Empress Qin was first stunned. Then something seemed to flash through her mind. Wait, what did you just say? This subject misspoke. Empress, please punish me. At this moment, Mao Mu lowered his head deeply, looking like he had done something wrong. Mao Mu's actions were indeed too much. How could he, a eunuch, talk about national affairs at any time? The aftermath of Wang Zhan's intimidation of the government was not over. Based on what he said just now, even if he had to be convicted, it would not be too much. Empress Qin did not think so much. She was only thinking about Zhu Qijin. She did not intend to pursue Mao Mu's unintentional words. On the contrary, when the title of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage came out, the young man who saved her from the palace flashed through her mind. For some reason, she seemed to see a light in her originally gloomy heart. Can he? Empress Qin seemed to be talking to herself, but also seemed to be asking Mao Mu in front of her. Mao Mu's head was originally lowered, but his eyes were constantly moving. He knew his identity. He was a spy arranged by Yang Qindong around Zhu Qijin. When something big happened here, he could ensure that he could get accurate information at the first time. This time, the Security Bureau, which rarely contacted him, directly found him and said that the sixth young master was preparing to go south. They asked him to coordinate and find an opportunity to command troops. Since he took the job, he had to do it. Originally, Mao Mu did not know how to ask. Using Zhu Huihua's matter, he found a breakthrough. Seeing that Empress Qin seemed to be moved, he tried to answer carefully. Your Highness, this subject thinks it should be possible. After all, when the Emperor was in trouble, he did a lot. Now that the army is in chaos, if the Duke of Loyalty and Courage can come, it should not be a big problem. He has the title of army god. Army god? Yes, this empress has heard of him, but he is now in the capital in the north. Will he come here to help the emperor? Empress Qian asked uncertainly. Whether he will or not, we have to try. After all, he is a subject of the great Ming, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Now that the army in the Walla in the north has retreated for a long time, presumably the Duke of Loyalty and Courage will not be of much use there. Mao Mu was still speaking carefully, but the speed of his speech was getting faster and faster, and his mind was getting more agile. Yes, we can try, Empress Qian muttered to herself, and then suddenly stood up as if she thought of something. At this moment, the helpless look on her face was completely different from before. It was as if she had suddenly found a good way. She wanted to see the emperor. Young Family Academy. After experiencing the bombardment of Blackwell Street, the enthusiasm of the students here was even higher. The fact told everyone that what they were learning would be the most advanced thing in the current society. Thinking about how the mountain head science could create such a huge commotion and how it could be so lethal, everyone's learning was no longer supervised by others. They all took the initiative to learn. Because of her identity, and because she was a girl, Junko did not get the opportunity to go to Blackwell Street to observe. But from the mouths of other students, she still learned what happened that night. Although the students had different descriptions of the cannons, there was one thing that couldn't be wrong, and that was the power of the cannons. They could kill people as if they were weeds. Thinking that if such a thing could be used by her father, then the situation in Japan might be better. Her father would no longer be a puppet, and he would have real power, and then lead Japan into a stage of rapid development. After having such thoughts in her heart, Junko could no longer calm down. She began to have ideas about Yang Chendong. Junko's Chinese was barely passable, but in terms of learning, she naturally could not be compared with the students of the Great Ming Dynasty. After all, her foundation was not solid, but fortunately, she had a shortcut, and that was to directly find the owner of this advanced artillery, Yang Chendong. After having this idea and thinking about the benefits she could give, Junko saw that Yang Chendong was about to leave after the class, so she trotted all the way to catch up with him. Yang Chendong, who was holding a textbook in his hand, felt Junko chasing behind him, and his footsteps could not help but slow down a little. Mountain Head, wait a minute. His footsteps paused slightly. Yang Chendong looked back with a faint smile on his face. Junko, what's the hurry? Mountain Head, no. Zhongdan Kuan, I have something to discuss with you. Junko thought that when talking about business, it was better not to talk about it with the relationship between a student and a teacher. Oh? Seeing that Junko was so formal, Yang Chendong nodded slightly and said, then let's talk while walking. The path leading to the inner courtyard of Yang Village, one tall and one short. A man and a woman slowly walked under the afterglow of the setting sun. Zhongdan Kuan, I heard about the bombardment of Kirijing Street. I want to buy those artillery. Name a price. No matter how much money it is, I can find a way to get it. Junko's voice was filled with great determination. She had known Yang Chendong for a long time, and she knew that he did not like to beat around the bush, so she simply went straight to the point. Buy artillery? Yang Chendong was stunned for a moment before he shook his head. I'm sorry, I borrowed the cannon. The implication was that the artillery was not his. Junko naturally knew a little about this. She knew that there were powerful mercenaries behind this Zhongdan Kuan. Presumably, those artillery should be in the hands of those mercenaries. But even though she knew this, Junko still put her hope on Yang Chendong. Lord Zhongdan, Junko knows your relationship with the mercenaries. Can you negotiate with them to sell me 2 cannons? If you can't, just one is fine too. How much money do you want? We can discuss it. Junko wanted to transport the artillery back to Japan, then bombard the general's residence, just like how they bombarded Kirijing Street, razing it to the ground. In this way, the general and his aides would die under the artillery, and his subordinates would be like a group of dragons without a leader. Then, the emperor would take the opportunity to seize the real power. And to do all this, she could only do it through Yang Chendong. Her face was full of hope. No matter how much money it is, Yang Chendong pretended to be very curious and asked. Chapter 317. Yes, we can discuss any amount. Junko blinked her beautiful big eyes. Any amount is negotiable? Yang Chendong repeated this sentence and saw the sincerity in the other party's eyes. He couldn't help but smile and said, "But do you know that when I wanted to buy one, the other party asked for 10 million taels? 10 million taels. Hiss. After hearing the price, a look of shock flashed across Junko Yu's face, followed by hesitation and confusion. Ha ha. Yang Chendong couldn't help but laugh after seeing her reaction. He turned and left. He knew that Junko had to think about some things carefully before coming to a decision. He couldn't push her too hard at this moment. As a person of the future, Yang Chendong naturally didn't have a good impression of Japan. If possible, he would bring Long Feng over. Rather than say that he was going to reform them, it was better to swallow them whole. It would be more satisfying to rule the world. However, although Long Feng's development was going smoothly, it was still very difficult to reach a certain scale due to the limitations of the environment, population, and wealth. Even if he was in the capital, he could only do things to intimidate others. He couldn't really overthrow them. Where would he find the time and effort to do anything to Japan? He wasn't strong enough, but that didn't mean that he couldn't do something first. For example, he could disrupt the internal affairs of Japan. This way, it would be much easier to deal with the empty Japan in the future. For this matter, Yang Chendong had thought of a few methods in his mind. However, he was still far away from Japan. A small fight wouldn't solve the problem, but he wasn't strong enough to fight a big fight. Without full confidence, he didn't do anything. Junko taking the initiative to look for him might be a chance for Yang Chendong. How could he let go of a chance to earn money? As for asking for 10 million taels of silver, it might seem like a lot to others, but he knew that Junko would definitely agree. However, in Yang Chendong's heart, making money was secondary. More importantly, he wanted to see the civil strife in Japan. He had already done some things before, but he always felt that it was not enough. He still needed to do more things. In that way, when Japan faced internal and external troubles, the pressure would be a lot less. After leaving Yang Chendong, Junko went to find her guard captain, Kobayashi. During this period of time, Xiao Lin was like a sponge, constantly absorbing water. The training methods of the Yang family manor were not hidden from him. After he saw it, he learned a lot. Only then did he realize how soldiers should be trained. Only then could they be truly elite. When Junko came to find Kobayashi, he was recording something in Japanese in his room. A good memory was not as good as a good pen. This was a common saying in many cases. Your Highness. As soon as she saw Junko open the door, Kobayashi was about to salute her out of habit. Forget it, there's no one else here. Junko shook her head, then sat on the chair for receiving guests, then looked at Kobayashi with sparkling eyes and asked, You must have heard about the artillery, right? Yes, I heard about it. I also took the time to go to Kyujing Street to take a look. The destructive power was really amazing. Xiao Lin, who replied, couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine when he thought of the collapsed houses that he saw. He even wondered what kind of destruction such a powerful cannon would cause if it hit Japanese soil. Who would be able to withstand it? Yang Chendong's sense of mystery and power strengthened in Kobayashi's heart. Then tell me, if these things could be used by your father, would the Supreme General still dare to be so domineering? After Kobayashi finished speaking, Junko lightly opened her red lips and asked, what? For a moment, Kobayashi was a little confused by this question. But after he reacted, he said with some excitement, Is he willing to give such powerful firearms to us? I bet he's already talked to him. We can buy it. But the price is a little more expensive, 10 million taels per cannon. Junko nodded. She didn't know if this was good news or bad news. Hiss. Kobayashi sucked in a breath of cold air. It was obvious that he was really shocked by this number. 10 million taels, even at the peak of the Ming dynasty. It took 2 years of tax revenue to reach this amount. Japan was much smaller than the Ming dynasty, so it was unknown how long it would take to gather this number. But thinking about it, although the number was huge, if they could really get it, it would be worth it. Not to mention that with this thing, the emperor would be the real emperor. Just with the specimen, they could later imitate it. Everyone had one head and 2 shoulders, so why could others create it? But they couldn't. Thinking of this, Kobayashi's eyes began to burn with passion. Your Highness, this is a good thing. Even you think so? If I send you back, will you be able to persuade father? Junko was waiting for Kobayashi to say this. The sudden change made Kobayashi finally understand the purpose of Junko's visit, and he couldn't help but fall into silence. 10 million taels of silver was a large amount, and he had to return to Japan. But his status was low, so he couldn't guarantee that he would be able to do it. The best way was, of course, to let Junko go back. But Kobayashi also knew that if Junko left now, who knew what would happen? Even if he had the money in the future, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to buy the cannon. If that was the case, wouldn't it be a waste? While Kobayashi was still hesitating, Junko said anxiously, "Kobayashi, I will write a letter to father, please." After saying this, she bowed deeply to Kobayashi. "Your Highness, please don't. I will try." Kobayashi saw Junko's action and knew that he couldn't avoid it. He thought that it was better to give it a try, and if it didn't work, he would just take a trip back to Japan and then find an opportunity to come back here. Kobayashi finally agreed, and Junko's face flashed with a charming smile. "Then I will go and talk to him, and then I will write a letter to father. You should be prepared." Junko quickly appeared in front of Yang Chendong and said that she wanted to buy the cannon. Of course, she still didn't say her identity, only that her family was very interested in it, and that such a powerful cannon could be sold at a higher price once it was shipped to Japan. 10 million taels of silver, this was already a heaven-defying price. Yang Chendong really couldn't think of any other price. But for Junko's completely self-deceiving idea, he could only nod. He also promised that once he saw the money, he didn't need to come to the Great Ming Dynasty anymore, and he could go to Little Luli Island to trade. And for safety, the mercenaries could escort the cannon to Japan's territorial waters. Junko was naturally happy that her safety was guaranteed. She was still very confident about whether or not she could get the cannon with the money. The source of this confidence was naturally her understanding of Yang Chendong. She knew that this person was a person who kept his promises, and he would never deceive her. Soon, Junko finished writing a letter. She wrote down what she had seen and heard in the Great Ming Dynasty, including the incident where her country sent samurai to attack the Tianjin garrison a while ago. She emphasized that the Great Ming Dynasty was now very powerful, and it was far from what the weak Japan could touch. She also hoped that father could stabilize the situation in the country and strengthen himself first. As for the power of the cannon, she wrote in detail. The most important thing was that with this weapon, it could instantly turn the general's mansion into a piece of scorched earth, and at that time, it would be the time when the imperial power would be concentrated. That night, Kobayashi left with the letter written by Junko, and under the protection of 2 soldiers sent by Yang Chendong. He would go straight to Tianjin Guard, where there would be a special ship to send him back to Japan. Sometimes opportunities were fleeting, sometimes rare, but sometimes they came as they wished. It was unknown whether the Yu family and Wu Yang's luck was too good, but after only 3 days, the opportunity appeared. On the night of Kobayashi's departure, something happened that even Yang Chendong didn't expect. It didn't seem artificial at all, and the fact was that it was just a coincidence. The crown prince, Zhu Jianxin, was ill. As the only son of Zhu Qiyu and the future successor of the emperor, his headache and fever were also national affairs. Because the illness happened at night and was a little urgent, the imperial physician, Li Qing, was called to the East Palace. After taking the pulse, he gave a prescription. After the medicine was boiled and taken, the illness not only didn't get better, but also became worse. At first, it was just diarrhea, but later, it became vomiting. This frightened the people who served here. The eunuchs first detained the imperial physician, Li Qing, and then reported the matter to the emperor, Zhu Qiyu, and Empress Heng. After receiving the news, Daizong and Empress Heng came to the East Palace with the imperial physician's office. Li Qing was also sent to the Ministry of Justice's prison to await punishment. Who was Li Qing? He wasn't as simple as an ordinary 8th-rank imperial physician. He had another identity, Yang Chendong's 5th brother-in-law, the Duke of Loyalty. As soon as something happened to Li Qing, the Li residents in the capital received the news. 5th sister Yang Chendong was even more anxious, and the first thing she thought of was her 6th brother, Yang Chendong. She hated that it was still dark, and the news couldn't be spread. As soon as the sky brightened, the security bureau in the city sent the news, saying that her 5th brother-in-law, Li Qing, was imprisoned in the Ministry of Justice's prison. It was said that he had injured the crown prince, Zhu Jianxin, but the details of the matter still needed to be investigated. Prepare the carriage. Let's go to the capital. Yang Qindong's feelings for his fifth sister were still very good. He could guess that his fifth sister was probably very anxious at this time, so he decided to go to the capital personally to ask for an explanation. Chapter 318. Yang Qindong suddenly entered the capital and saw fifth sister's carriage at the Yongding gate. Immediately, Yang Qindong comforted fifth sister and asked her to return to the residence and wait. He would investigate everything and give her an explanation. With sixth brother taking action, Yang Li was naturally relieved. She also knew that it was not good for a woman to appear in public at this time, so she returned to the residence. At that time, many people saw the scene of the conversation, and the news quickly spread to all sides. When Yin Tao heard the news, he couldn't hide the joy on his face. The Duke of Loyalty suddenly entered the capital, so the security around him would not be as tight as usual. This was their opportunity. He immediately went straight to Changshan Inn to inform Wu Yong to make preparations. At the same time, the Yu residents also received the news that the eldest grandson, Yu Yunbi, quietly left the residence and went straight to the embroidered uniform guard. There were some elite soldiers who received money from the Yu family there, and now is the time to use them. After Yang Qindong entered the city, he went straight to the prison of the Ministry of Justice. The prison of the Ministry of Justice. Two large stone lions stood majestically in front of the gate. Soldiers in armor stood in all directions. Constables in yamen uniforms could be seen walking back and forth from time to time, keeping an eye on the important criminals locked up here. This was another place to imprison serious criminals, second only to the imperial prison. In the Great Ming dynasty, there were usually 3 places to imprison guilty people in the capital. The first was the imperial prison. Most of the people locked up there were people of high status, such as members of the imperial family or high-ranking officials. The second was the prison of the Ministry of Justice. Those who were locked up there were people of some status, or who had committed serious crimes. The third was the prison of the Supreme Court. Relatively speaking, those who were locked up there were commoners who had committed minor crimes and did not have much of a background. As a place to imprison serious criminals, the level of defense here was naturally not low. If ordinary people wanted to enter to visit, in addition to having a warrant from the head of the Ministry of Justice, some rich people were willing to spend a lot of money to see the prisoner. However, the moment the luxurious carriage appeared here, these rules obviously did not apply. This was because the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Su Yozhen, had been waiting here for a long time. It wasn't Yang Qindong who gave him the order through the security bureau. It was all Su Yozhen's guess. Li Qing of the Imperial Academy of Medicine was the 5th brother-in-law of the Duke of Loyalty. Based on his understanding, it was impossible for the Duke to not show up. Her guess was correct. Su Yozhen couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief when she saw the one-of-a-kind luxurious carriage. What he was most worried about was that the loyal guild, who never suffered any losses, would forcefully break into the Ministry of Justice's prison. Moreover, this matter was related to the current crown prince. It was hard to predict what kind of consequences would arise. Fortunately, he still appeared here in advance. It seemed that some mistakes could be avoided. The carriage stopped, and the curtain was opened by the accompanying tiger's mane. Yang Qindong appeared in front of the Ministry of Justice's prison. Su Yozhen, who was standing on the steps, quickly walked over and said, "This official greets the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. May I know why you are in such a hurry?" With his back facing the crowd, Su Yozhen faced Yang Qindong and tried his best to blink a few times, as if to remind him of something. Yang Qindong's face showed a trace of satisfaction at Su Yozhen's appearance. As expected of an important figure in history, his ability to grasp people's hearts was not low. Since the other party was standing here, it would be easier for him to do some things. So it is Assistant Minister Su. This Duke wants to see Li Qing of the Imperial Academy of Medicine. Please make it convenient. This. Su Yozhen's face was somewhat bitter. He had already given him a hint. How could the High Duke still say such things? As if he knew what Su Yozhen was thinking, Yang Qindong actually laughed. Then, he walked forward and closed the distance between them. At the same time, He said in a voice that only the two of them could hear. I just want to understand the situation. I won't break into the prison and won't cause any trouble. Don't worry. When the voice reached Su Yozhin's ears, a trace of doubt appeared on his face. Was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage really going to be reasonable this time? Was he really going to take Li Qing away after seeing him? At this moment, he was somewhat doubtful. In fact, Su Yozhin was being too careful to measure the heart of a gentleman. Because of his military accomplishments and the fact that he had beaten up the Japanese envoy, it was easy for people to have preconceived notions. In fact, Yang Chendong had always been very reasonable. Since Yang Chendong said to be at ease, he must know the importance of this matter. As such, Su Yozhin could not say anything. In fact, even if the other party insisted on taking Li Qing away, there was not much he could do to stop him. Su Yozhin agreed. With the second-in-command of the Ministry of Justice's left assistant minister following him, the path to the Ministry of Justice's prison was naturally smooth. Soon, they saw Li Qing, who was in a solitary cell. Li Qing looked to be in his early 30s. He was also born into a scholarly family. Because he was extremely passionate about medicine, he had studied it from a young age. He had quite a bit of success. Later on, through his family's connections, he entered the Imperial Hospital to take up a post. It was precisely because of his passion for medicine that even when he was in prison, the first thing he thought about was Zhu Jianqin's illness. His brows were tightly knitted, and he did not make a sound. It seemed like he was still thinking about the illness and did not take his current situation seriously at all. This is Empress Hang's imperial decree. The matter has not been investigated clearly yet, so no one is making things difficult for him. When they arrived outside the solitary cell, Su Yozhin wanted to dismiss the people beside him to give Yang Chendong and Li Qing a chance to be alone. There is no need for this. Yang Chendong raised his right hand slightly. His trip this time was just to visit a prisoner. It was not like he was doing anything shameful. There was no need to have the others leave at all. This would instead easily cause others to make unfounded guesses. At the same time, it would also have an adverse effect on Su Yozhin. Su Yozhin did not allow the others to leave. Just as he was wondering what Yang Chendong was going to do, he squatted down. He squatted down and looked at Li Qing, who was behind the iron door, and asked, "Fifth brother-in-law, what exactly is going on? Also, how is the Crown Prince's illness? Can you tell me about it?" "Oh, Chendong is here." Li Qing, who had been meditating, was interrupted by Yang Chendong's voice. Only then did he realize where he was. He couldn't help but bitterly smile and say, "It is rare for the loyal Duke to come and see me. I am endlessly grateful." "Okay, fifth brother-in-law, let's talk about serious matters. What is going on with the Crown Prince's illness?" Yang Chendong did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. All of this was seen by Su Yozhin. He could not help but admire Li Qing's character. Just now, when he first called out Chendong Lai, it was clear that he did not realize where he was. He only thought that it was because he was greeting someone at home. However, when he found out that he was in a prison cell, he was not too surprised. Instead, he expressed his gratitude. If he was the one being thrown into prison, he definitely wouldn't be able to maintain his composure. While thinking this, Su Yozhin noticed that at this moment, Li Qing was really telling Yang Chendong about the Crown Prince's illness. He was speechless in his heart. What was going on? Shouldn't they be asking who Li Qing had offended and who he suspected of being framed by? What was the point of talking about his illness now? It was clear that Su Yozhin was judging others by his own standards. He believed that there must be someone framing him for this to happen. However, Yang Chendong had already thought it through. Perhaps it was because of the illness, which was why he asked about medicine. Li Qing was a knowledgeable person. He was especially knowledgeable when it came to medicine. If it was about other things, perhaps he could stay silent for a long time. However, when it came to professional matters, he spoke with assurance and spoke about Zhu Jianqin's illness. Diarrhea, abdominal pain, bloating, nausea, vomiting, headache, fever. After a stool test, it was yellow and watery. I've already written a prescription, but considering the Crown Prince's young age and poor health, I didn't dare to use too much. I only used half of the usual amount. But who would have thought that his illness would worsen and he would vomit? This is all my fault. I'm really speechless. Li Qing spoke for a long time. There were many words that Su Yozhen did not understand. However, when he looked at Yang Chendong, he stood there and nodded as if he understood. Okay, I understand. How about this? You stay here and don't make a fuss. I will make sure that nothing happens to you. After finally understanding the truth, Yang Chendong had some guesses in his heart. After comforting Li Qing, he turned to Su Yozhen and said seriously, "My fifth brother-in-law is here. If he is treated unnaturally, your Ministry of Justice should know the consequences. Loyal Duke, don't worry. Our Ministry of Justice does things based on evidence." With someone watching, Su Yozhen naturally spoke with an official tone. That would be for the best. Yang Chendong nodded and left with large strides. At the entrance of the Ministry of Justice, he re-entered the luxurious carriage. However, the carriage did not leave for a long time. Su Yozhen, who was waiting to see him off, was puzzled. Su Yozhen did not understand what Yang Chendong was doing. Just as he was about to ask, the curtain of the carriage was opened again. Yang Chendong appeared with a box in his hand. "Give this to the Crown Prince. His illness should be under control. Take it." Tiger's mane handed the box to Su Yozhen. Yang Chendong's voice sounded again. "I will not leave the capital. If the effect is not good, Your Majesty can send people to arrest me. However, if he does not dare to take this medicine and does not trust me, then don't blame me for reasoning with him." After saying this, the curtain of the carriage was lowered again. Su Yozhen stood there with a puzzled expression. Chapter 319. However, since Yang Chendong had said so, what else could Su Yozhen do? She could only nod her head and head back to the palace. In the carriage, Yang Chendong sighed. After hearing Li Qing's words, he went into the large warehouse to investigate and found out that Zhu Jianshan was suffering from viral enteritis. This illness was naturally not a serious illness in the future, but in the past, it could have been fatal. Thinking back, Zhu Jianshan's early death might have had something to do with this. This matter was not complicated, and it was not that the imperial physicians were not skilled. It was just that the crown prince's illness came too quickly. In addition, he was a child and had a weak body. If strong medicine could not be used, it might harm the body and cause a greater rebound. People would always say that many times, the imperial physicians were not as good as some barefoot doctors when it came to treating illnesses. This was actually a misconception. To be able to enter the imperial hospital, which one of them did not have real skills? After going through layers of selection, and their family background was clean, the reason why some illnesses were not as good as the treatment methods of the country doctors was because the patients they faced were either rich or noble. These people had a common problem, and that was that life was very precious. For example, if they had the same illness, if they were ordinary people, it was fine if they died, but if they survived, it would be a skill that could make them famous. The barefoot doctors could naturally do things without restrictions. Sometimes, they even came to treat patients with experimental methods. However, in the imperial hospital, it was completely different. They first had to ensure that they did not make any mistakes and protect themselves. In this kind of environment, it was fine if they did not do well, but they could not mess things up. Most of the time, they used conservative methods. Some small illnesses would not be cured quickly due to various misgivings, and it was not uncommon for it to become a serious illness. What was Zhu Jianshan's status? The crown prince, he was the future emperor. In addition, his birth mother was Empress Hang, the eldest son of the first wife, and the only son of the substitute emperor, Zhu Qiyu. His importance could be seen. There really wasn't the slightest bit of accident or carelessness. Li Qing was a good example to learn from. Li Qing's matter also rang an alarm bell for the other imperial physicians. What if his body couldn't take it and there were side effects? There was no need for that. Ordinary methods were too slow to take effect, and it was normal for new situations to occur at any time. As a result, they were all hesitant and wanted to decline. In the face of such a situation, Zhu Qiyan was naturally enraged. He even threatened that if anything happened to his son, he would find trouble with these imperial physicians. But even so, no one would take the initiative to stand out and cause trouble. Most of the time, it was one thing to be punished passively, but it was another thing to take the initiative to take responsibility and look for trouble. It was at this moment that Su Yozhen arrived. He brought the medicine that Yang Chendong had given him. It was a small box with a strange packaging. Inside it was a long red and white pill. In fact, it was just the most common enteritis calming capsule in the future. Through Li Qing's description and his confident tone, Yang Chendong had a rough understanding of his condition. After entering the carriage, he flashed into the large warehouse. After another round of investigation, he confirmed that the Crown Prince Zhu Jianxin was most likely suffering from viral enteritis. Then, he took out the medicine for the illness. The existence of the large warehouse was an unlimited cheating device. Anything that was placed inside would never expire. This was also Yang Chendong's greatest reliance. After Su Yozhen received the capsule, he came all the way to the imperial palace. It would be a lie to say that he did not have any suspicions or speculations. But when he thought of how much effort and money the Duke of Loyalty had spent on him, if something happened to him, it would not be in the other party's interest. When he thought of Yang Chendong's strange methods, he finally chose to believe him. Of course, he could only be responsible for delivering the capsule. As for whether the emperor would let Zhu Jianxin take it, that was something he could not do. In the imperial palace, the imperial physician's self-protection made Zhu Qiyu furious. As soon as Su Yozhen appeared and presented him with the medicine, he saw a turning point. He immediately ordered a few imperial physicians to study the medicine to see if it was poisonous. He even purposely had a eunuch take the medicine. After ensuring that there was no danger, he finally gave it to the crown prince. The medicine started to take effect. The crown prince did not feel as uncomfortable and fell into a deep sleep. Several imperial physicians came forward to check his pulse and confirmed that his condition had improved a lot. At this moment, Zhu Qiyu finally let out a sigh of relief. Good, beloved official Su has done a meritorious service by presenting the medicine. Reward. Zhu Qiyu, who was in a good mood, looked at Su Yozhen and was particularly pleasing to the eye. With a putong sound, Su Yozhen knelt on the ground. He hurriedly explained in detail that the medicine was delivered by the Duke of Loyalty. He also emphasized the matter of Li Qing from the imperial hospital. With meritorious service, no one would push it away. However, Yang Chendong was still waiting for news in front of the Ministry of Justice's prison. At this moment, how could Su Yozhen dare to be greedy? Zhu Qiyu stood there and quietly listened to everything. After the matter was clear, he couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. He originally thought that the medicine was a folk prescription that Su Yozhen had obtained. In addition, the matter was urgent, so he did not ask too much. Now that he knew that it was done by Yang Chendong, he was worried that this medicine that he had never seen before might have other side effects. After all, the crown prince had an accident. When he was in danger, there was no one to inherit his mantle. If Yang Chendong was suspected of rebelling, doing things like this was not impossible. He had some doubts in his heart. After all, Yang Chendong's power had long created a situation where his meritorious service shocked the emperor. Logically speaking, based on his meritorious service and the things he had done, it would not be excessive to give him the title of one of the three dukes. However, Zhu Qiyu did not do so. It was because his weakness could easily create a sharp contrast with the other party's strength. Fortunately, this Duke of Loyalty and Courage followed the rules. When he had nothing to do, he would do his best to be a teacher in the Yang family manner. He also rarely interacted with the important officials in court. As the emperor, he was very satisfied with this kind of method of not forming cliques. In order to compromise, as long as Yang Chendong did not do things too ostentatiously, he would also turn a blind eye. For example, when he beat up the Japanese envoy and wrestled with Minister Yu Shiyue, he only reprimanded him. He did not do anything excessive. It seemed like the well water did not interfere with the river water, but in reality, both sides were secretly on guard. In this kind of environment, if Zhu Qiyu knew that the medicine was given by Yang Chendong, he probably would not dare to eat it. He did not reprimand Su Yozhen for not explaining the source of the medicine first, because Zhu Qiyu also knew that once she explained it clearly, the crown prince's condition would worsen. All right, Jin understands the matter. It seems that imperial physician Li Qing was wrongly accused this time. How about this? You release him and promote him by one rank. As Zhu Qiyu spoke, he waved his hand, indicating that Su Yozhen could leave. Yes, your majesty. After Su Yozhen agreed, she bowed and left. In his heart, he understood that this matter was over. He didn't reward Yang Chendong, who had taken out the medicine, because the emperor didn't want to have any more dealings with him. However, raising Wang Qing's rank was actually a gesture of goodwill. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage entered the city, and it seemed that he entered the city in a hurry, so there were not many guards around him. As soon as the news came out, Head Constable Yin Tao came to Chengshan Inn. In the past few days, Wu Yong had done a lot of things. With gold and silver, and some connections with the Black Water Gang, he had found many Lulan experts. The famous ones were Copper Whip Wang Gu A, Silver Spear Song Gang, Swimming Dragon Han Li Zixing, and others. These people's martial arts were not low. They had stayed in the Blackwell Street for a period of time because of a mishap and were taken care of by boss Hu Huaihai. It was because of this relationship that these people contacted Wu Yong in 2s and 3s under the promise of great benefits. Although the matter with the Black Water Gang had come to an end, Wu Yong still did not dare to move around in the capital during the day. When Yin Tao came to find him, he was lying on the bed to catch up on his sleep. However, when he heard the noise, he immediately stood up. When he got up, a short sword was already in his hand. "It's me, don't be so nervous. I came to tell you that he entered the city and is now at the entrance of the Ministry of Justice's prison. There are only a dozen guards around him." Yin Tao's voice came in an extremely low volume. Then, the inn quickly became quiet again, giving people the feeling that this place had always been quiet. Wu Yong maintained the posture of holding the sword until there was no sound from the outside world. Then, as if he had woken up, his eyes flashed. Then, he put on some makeup and quickly left Chengshan Inn. Although with his status, it would be more dangerous to go out during the day, some opportunities were fleeting. If he did not seize them, he did not know when the next opportunity would come. As for Yin Tao, after leaving Chengshan Inn, he went to Yu Mansion again. This time, it was easy for him to walk in. The person who received him was the eldest grandson of Yu Mansion, Yu Yunbi. He had also received the news and was waiting for his arrival. Then, a large net covered Yang Chendong's head. However, before everything happened, it was still very calm, like the darkness before dawn. There was no wind, no rain, and no sunlight. In front of the Ministry of Justice's prison, Li Qing was released. He did not show any fear on his face. Perhaps it was because the time he spent in prison was too short, and his attention was focused on his illness. Fifth sister Yang Chendong also rushed over in the Li family's carriage. When she picked up her husband, the two of them expressed their gratitude to Yang Chendong. In this regard, the sixth young master Yang casually waved his hand, as if he did not care. Since they were family, he wouldn't be stingy when it came to helping out. Not to mention, Li Qing was indeed a talent, a professional talent. If he could gain more experience, he had already begun to consider whether or not he should bring him to his side. Chapter 320. After settling the matter, Yang Chendong naturally would not stay in front of the prison of the Ministry of Justice any longer. The carriage turned around and headed straight for the south of the city. Everything that happened here today was just a small interlude in Yang Chendong's eyes. It was not something to be taken seriously, but he did not know that there was a murderous plot waiting for him on the way back. The Yongding Gate was one of the gates that Yang Chendong used to return to the Yang village. They had passed through this place countless times, and even the soldiers of the 5 cities warden's office were extremely familiar with this place. When they saw that one of the most luxurious carriages in the capital, they bowed from a distance to express the respect they felt for it. Every time this happened, the curtain of the carriage would be opened, revealing Yang Chendong's young, handsome, and calm face. He nodded slightly, which could be considered as a greeting to the soldiers. Just this small action made countless soldiers extremely excited. Their eyes shone with excitement. Speaking of which, Yang Chendong still had some influence in the army, and it was not small before. Just like after defeating the Walla army, it was easy for him to infiltrate the army with his influence. But he did not do so. Originally, he walked the path of the elite. Although this way, the early development would be very slow, the advantage was that he had a solid foundation. Yang Chendong also believed that, with the passage of time, there would be a day when this army would grow stronger. At that time, it would be the time for them to rise to the top of the world. The carriage left the Yongding Gate, and headed for the Yang village 15 li away. In front of them, a group of 100 people was waiting in formation. They were lying on the side of the road, holding their breath and waiting for something. They were dressed in different clothes, and many of them were not familiar with each other. But this did not prevent them from gathering here, because they had a common goal, and that was to kill the Duke of Loyalty of the great Ming dynasty. The people of the Lulan did not follow any rules. They might go berserk and kill people because of a sentence, but they might also fight because of a contemptuous look, or fight over meaningless disputes. It was because of this that they were even more terrifying. And now, this group of terrifying people were gathered together. From this, it could be seen how powerful the person who attracted them was. That man was Wu Yong, the former second-in-command of the Blackwater Gang. He was lucky enough to survive. Back then, his mission was to ambush Yang Chendong halfway, but because he was detected too early, he failed in the end. This time, he took the same route as before and even led these people to an ambush location not far from the previous ambush location. With this arrangement, he seemed to want to climb back up from where he fell. There were more than 100 heroes. All of them were Lulan people, and all of them had learned some martial arts. Among them, there were some who had made a name for themselves in Jianghu, such as Copper Whip Wang Gue, Silver Spear Song Gang, Roaming Dragon Hanli Zixing, and so on. All of them had the ability to take on more than 10 people. If they were to encounter an ordinary man who relied on brute force, perhaps even 10 or 20 people would not be a match for them. Of course, Wu Yong was able to invite them because of the temptation of a large sum of money. Wu Yong said that after the matter was completed, the rewards would be very rich. However, at the same time, he also wanted to make a name for himself. In Jianghu, what mattered most was reputation and righteousness. The so-called reputation naturally referred to reputation and fame. Righteousness referred to the spirit of loyalty and righteousness that reached the clouds. Previously, during the bombardment of Blackwell Street, who knew how many Lulan people were killed? These people roamed Jianghu all year round, so it was impossible for them not to have 2 or 3 friends. For example, among these 100 people, there were some who came with the intention of avenging the death of their old friends. There were also some who came for fame. If they could kill the Duke of Loyalty and Courage of the great Ming dynasty, presumably, it would be awe-inspiring. From then on, their reputation in Jianghu would be even more resounding, and it would be easier for them to do things. With all kinds of thoughts, more than 100 people hid in the dense forest beside the road. Since they were experts who had learned martial arts, they naturally had the ability to hide and adjust their breath, so that from a distance, it was impossible to see anything wrong with this place compared to other places. Under everyone's expectant eyes, a luxurious carriage appeared, and a small guard team of more than a dozen people also appeared in everyone's line of sight. At this moment, an austere atmosphere unknowingly filled this dense forest. Affected by it, one's breathing unconsciously became heavier. If one's hearing was good, one would already be able to faintly hear the sound of slightly heavy breathing. The carriage approached from afar, 300 feet, 200 feet, 100 feet, 800 feet, 500 feet, 300 feet, 10 feet, 8 feet, 5 feet. As it got closer and closer, the faces of the guards could already be seen through the dense forest. Suddenly, a loud shout rang out, and then a figure seemed to descend from the sky. A long bronze whip smashed directly at the moving carriage. The wind was swift, and the rain was like thunder. Under this blow, it had the power to wipe out 1,000 soldiers. Caught off guard, the roof of the luxurious carriage was hit heavily, and the whole body of the carriage seemed to be smashed a lot. However, because the body of the carriage was really sturdy, it was pierced with one blow. The person who made the move was Copper Whip Wang Gue. He first hid in a big tree, and when the carriage passed by, he suddenly attacked from above. He wanted to split the carriage to reveal the target of this trip, but because he underestimated the sturdiness of the carriage, his attack failed. When the attack began, a whip fell from the sky, and the horn of the attack was blown. Figures rushed out from the dense forest, either holding swords, sabers, or spears. The speed of these people was very fast. The distance of 100 feet was covered in only 2 to 3 breaths. Before the dozen or so guards could react, They rushed towards the unique and luxurious carriage that represented an extraordinary meaning. Boom! A long spear flashing with silver light directly pierced into the carriage. The one who made the move was Silver Spear Songgang. After Copper Whip Wang Gui's attack failed, he used his own attack method. Clang! Just as the long spear was about to pierce into the carriage, a long saber came slashing over and struck the body of the silver spear, causing it to deviate slightly. The long spear that was supposed to enter through the curtain instead pierced the edge of the window, causing wood chips to fly into the air. Protect the young master. Beta Persei, who was holding the saber, had a very ugly expression on his face after the attack. Just from the exchange of blows just now, it seemed that he was not much better in terms of martial arts. There was no need for Beta Persei to shout anything else, as more than a dozen long phone guards had already begun to draw their sabers to protect the carriage. They formed a group of 3, back to back, forming a circle. They stood on the side of the carriage, staring coldly at the people of the forest rushing in front of them. This was the 3-3 system taught by Yang Chundong. Once, this strategy was used to fight the United States Army during the war to resist U.S. aggression and aid Korea. Now, it was used on the battlefield like an extension of one's arm. It was very useful and could be used to protect one's back and sides as much as possible in a chaotic battle. It allowed one to fight wholeheartedly without having to worry about other threats. As soon as the 3-3 system was used, although there were only more than a dozen long phone guards, the 5 circles formed were very similar to one. This made the forest people, who were originally fighting separately, feel like they were impenetrable and impenetrable. Don't hold back. Finish off the target as soon as possible. Wu Yong also appeared in the crowd. His gaze only swept over the dozen long phone guards before returning to the luxurious carriage. Intuition told him that these guards were very troublesome and difficult to deal with. Instead of fighting with them, it was better to directly kill Yang Chindong in the carriage. When the time came, things would naturally be much easier to deal with without a leader. With Wu Yong's appearance, the forest people who were originally fighting on their own became much more orderly. They began to approach the carriage step by step. At the same time, they also sent a portion of their men to surround the other 5 circles in other directions, using the tactic of holding back the guards. Quickly close in. Beta Persei saw that the opponents were closing in step by step and shouted with a thunderous voice. His voice was already very loud to begin with, so this shout was like a sudden clap of thunder, directly shaking the ears of swimming dragon Han Li Zixing, who had just rushed over, to the point of buzzing. Li Zixing's footsteps were a little shaky because of this loud roar. Beta Persei, who used the roar similar to a lion's roar to disturb the enemy, immediately brandished his sword. He wanted to use this opportunity to cut down the people in front of him. The wind from the blade whistled and fell from the sky with a flash of light, drawing a beautiful arc. It was not until it was 20 centimeters away from Li Zixing's neck that it was forced to stop. It was a flashing silver spear, blocking the place where the blade fell. I'll help you. The one who made the move was Silver Spear Songgang. Just like how Beta Persei blocked his spear from entering the carriage, this time he also blocked Beta Persei's killing move against Li Zixing. The blade was blocked, and there was a very crisp sound of weapons clashing. This also let Li Zixing know what had happened. After a loud shout, he pushed out his palms and slammed them in front of Beta Persei. Even though Beta Persei was tall and strong, he did not dare to underestimate the two of them. He stepped back to ensure his own safety. Beta Persei was forced to retreat to the side. The situation did not seem good. Even the other 15 members of the Cold Front were beginning to be separated. They were in a team of 3, and they were facing a team of more than 10 people. Under the advantage of several times the manpower, they were like small boats sailing in the sea, with the possibility of capsizing at any time. In a situation where a crisis could occur at any time, they really did not have the opportunity to take out their guns and fire. The Cold Front were separated, and Beta Persei was forced to retreat to the side, leaving the front door of the carriage wide open. Only a hanging curtain was left hanging there, indicating that he was still very mysterious. Go open the curtain. Wu Yong came to the carriage with more than 10 of the forest experts. When he thought of Yang Chindong's title as the war god, he did not know why, but at this moment, there was a trace of fear in his heart. Chapter 321. The forest man pointed out by Wu Yong did not have so many taboos. Sometimes, ignorance was blameless. He did not know how powerful Yang Chendong was, and was even a little excited that he could lift the curtain. Taking large strides forward, he placed the saber in his left hand and reached out his hand towards the area where the palanquin curtain was. Bang! The sound of a gunshot rang out, and the blade fell to the ground. A bloody hole appeared on the forehead of the greenwood man, and blood was flowing out of it. His eyes were wide open, showing the confusion and fear he had in the moment before he died. The man fell to the ground, and a strong smell of blood naturally came out and drilled into the nostrils of Wu Yong and the others. Hiss! Seeing the scene in front of him, Wu Yong could not help but suck in a breath of cold air, and at the same time, he naturally took a step back. He knew that the loyal duke was not easy to kill, and now it seemed that it was indeed so. Let's go together. But the hesitation only lasted for a moment, and Wu Yong made up his mind again. As the second brother of the Black Water Gang, he had naturally come into contact with the firearms of the great Ming dynasty before. He knew that although this thing was powerful, it had more problems. For example, it was only effective at close range, and it could only fire one shot at a time. But out of his cautious nature, he did not send people to try, but decided to swarm in. When the time came, how would the loyal duke, who only had one firearm, deal with it? Initially, the gunshot had indeed frightened everyone. They were still thinking about what to do next, but Wu Yong's voice had already sounded. When he heard that everyone was going to attack together, he suddenly became spirited again. Perhaps this was human nature. When one person was afraid to do something because of fear, the fear seemed to disappear when everyone was together. Under Wu Yong's encouragement, more than a dozen people were divided into two groups. They formed a semicircle and closed in on the luxurious carriage. All kinds of weapons flashed coldly, and they were ready to kill at any time. The scene in front of the carriage made Beta Persei and the 15 Long Feng brothers anxious. They tried to get closer, but they were all blocked by the forest people who had the advantage in numbers. Among them, Beta Persei had rushed too fiercely and did not take care of his own defense. His shoulder was hit by Li Zixing's swimming dragon hand, and his entire left arm felt numb. This was because he had been training for many years. If it was an ordinary person, they would not be able to fight back after being hit by this palm. No one could come to help. Yang Chendong, who was in the carriage, seemed to have fallen into a desperate situation. At least, that was what Wu Yong thought. In his opinion, Yang Chendong was only in his early 20s. Even some of the martial arts grandmasters and famous big shots would find it very difficult to rush out when facing a dozen or more opponents. Big brother, third brother, this brother is going to avenge you, Wu Yong muttered in his heart. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. At this moment, it was as if he wanted to chop off Yang Chendong's head as a sacrifice for his brothers. The forest people approached step by step. The nearest person was already within arm's reach of the carriage's curtain. That person held the long sword in his hand and swung it forward. He wanted to cut off the curtain to provide enough support for his and his brother's vision. For a moment, everyone's eyes were focused on the long sword, as if they wanted to see what kind of vision the sword would bring when it was swung down. They also wanted to see if the young loyal duke of the great Ming dynasty, whom they had identified as their target, was really that powerful. Did he really have 3 heads and 6 arms? Bang! Another gunshot rang out, accompanied by the scene of the forest man holding the sword falling to the ground. This gunshot also caused the other forest men to involuntarily take a step back. Obviously, they were very wary of this flintlock. Don't be afraid. He only has one flintlock. If we attack together, he won't be able to do anything. Wu Yong saw that the morale of his men was shaken, so he immediately shouted loudly. As he looked around, he saw Copper Whip Wang Gue and the others besieging a 3-man cold vanguard squad. Under the wave of the Copper Whip, the 3-man squad was indeed in a very difficult situation. There were even different wounds on the 3 men's bodies. However, the formation was really special. At the very least, it was useful for defense. It actually caused the forest men, who outnumbered them by several times, to be unable to find a suitable opportunity to attack in a short period of time. Since it didn't work immediately, Wu Yong shouted loudly, "Brother Wang, please come help." Oh, how is it? Why hasn't the carriage been opened yet? Wang Gui, who was attracted by the shout, stood beside Wu Yong. His voice seemed to be concerned, but in reality, it was filled with a sense of superiority. He was thinking about the uselessness of these people. With so many people, they couldn't even deal with a stopped carriage. It was really difficult to look up to them. Yes, it hasn't been opened yet. It seems that we still need Brother Wang's copper whip. Wu Yong was very good at manipulating people. Naturally, he could see Wang Gui's arrogance. However, it didn't matter. He would just satisfy the other party. At most, he would say a few nice words. It wasn't like he would lose anything. Sure enough, after hearing Wu Yong's flattering words, Wang Gui laughed heartily. Fine, since Brother Wu has said so, then I have no choice but to make a move. Come, all of you, get out of the way. Watch me directly shatter that curtain. Wang Gui, who was laughing, placed the 7-section copper whip on the ground. The other forest men also tactfully retreated to the side. The power of the 2 spears was truly frightening. They couldn't figure out what was inside the carriage, and they didn't even know when to dodge at the crucial moment. It was better to let Wang Gui use his copper whip to lift the curtain. The forest men obeyed and retreated to the side. However, from the way they stood, they still faintly surrounded the carriage. It seemed that they were only waiting for their field of vision to widen so that they could charge forward and finish off their target. Under everyone's gaze, Wang Gui raised his right arm. The veins on his arm were already bulging at this moment. The 7-section copper whip followed a loud whistling sound as it smashed towards the huge curtain of the luxurious carriage. As expected of the copper whip, this time, Wang Gui's attack was very accurate. With just one strike, it hit the horse curtain. With a twist and a pull, the originally heavy curtain flew up along with the copper whip. At this moment, the figure of the person in the luxurious carriage was clearly imprinted in everyone's line of sight. A green robe with a calm face. There wasn't the slightest hint of nervousness or urgency from being surrounded. This was the first impression that Yang Chendong gave everyone. As expected of the Duke of Loyal and Courageous, Wu Yong had once been fortunate enough to see Yang Chendong on the street. Although it was still far away, he could still recognize him. At this moment, when he saw that the person in the carriage was the target that he wanted to take his life, he couldn't help but excitedly shout out. Just as Wu Yong's shout fell, Yang Chendong in the carriage sighed. That's right. I am the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. However, I don't know what enmity I have with you. Why must you take my life? You've killed countless people. Do I need a reason to kill you? At this moment, Wu Yong really wanted to tell Yang Chendong how his big brother and third brother were killed. However, considering that a long delay might lead to trouble, he decisively chose to give up. Instead, he held a ghost knife in his hand and pointed at Yang Chendong. Kill him. Whoever kills him will be rewarded with 1,000 taels of silver. 1,000 taels of silver was enough for an ordinary family of 3 to live for the rest of their lives. Even for the forest people who spent money extravagantly, it was a huge sum of money. As the saying goes, people die for wealth. As the shout fell, 4 or 5 figures had already rushed out. Their target was Yang Chendong, who was sitting in the carriage. They could already see clearly. Kill. The 5 figures shouted in unison. It seemed like they were cheering for themselves, but also seemed like they were raising their voices. Sigh, you're forcing me to kill. In the carriage, Yang Chendong sighed softly. Then, he took out his hands that were hidden under his green robe. At the same time, he also took out a machine gun used by the 9th Squad. With the great warehouse in hand, the world is mine. How could Yang Chendong, who could enter the great warehouse at any time and take out all kinds of new weapons, be afraid of these unorganized, so-called heroes of the forest in front of him? These people had no discipline. When there were benefits, they would often rush up like a swarm of bees. When there was danger, they would often run away without a trace. Against such opponents, as long as he could suppress their morale, it would be much easier to deal with what came next. In Yang Chendong's eyes, these people were not even as good as a well-trained army. At least, when the general gave the order, these soldiers would charge even if they knew that they would die. That might be a headache for him, but these forest people in front of him, this motley crew, really did not mean anything in his eyes. With a look of contempt in his eyes, he pulled the trigger with his right index finger, and the sound of firecrackers rang out. Bang, bang, bang. Bang, bang, bang. It was as if someone was welcoming a bride, and the sound of firecrackers rang out non-stop. Following the sound of gunfire, in reality, the first 5 Greenwood warriors who rushed over had blood-red flowers appear on their bodies. Then, like dominoes, they fell to the ground one by one. What is this? Wu Yong and the others, who did not understand the details and did not even know what an advanced igniter was, were dumbfounded. Previously, Wu Yong thought that since Yang Chendong could lead the army to repel Walla's attack, he must be someone with some ability. However, his ability should be mainly reflected in his intelligence, just like his position in the Blackwater Gang, where he was a strategist and played the game of strategizing. However, in terms of skills, perhaps this young loyal duke had also learned martial arts, but after all, he was too young and should not have any deeper attainments. This was also because Wu Yong overestimated Yang Chendong enough, which was why he brought more than 100 people to besiege him. With nearly 10 times the number advantage and a sudden attack, no matter how one looked at it, they would not fail. But now, when the gunshots rang out continuously, seeing his brothers fall to the ground one by one, he finally realized that he had underestimated this loyal duke of the great Ming dynasty. Chapter 322. A volley of bullets shot out, and the first row of 5 Greenwood warriors closest to the carriage fell to the ground with their eyes wide open, as though they were unable to rest in peace. Yang Chendong smacked his lips and shook his head. I already said, you guys forced me to kill. Since I've already killed, I'll continue to kill. Suo Chendong seemed to be looking for an excuse for himself. After he finished speaking, he raised his gun and aimed it at the other forest warriors surrounding the carriage. Run! Wu Yong immediately noticed that the pitch-black muzzle was raised. Out of instinct, he shouted to run, but his body took the initiative to hide behind Copper Whip Wang Gue. This person's stature was similarly tall and could be Wu Yong's first shield. Not everyone had Wu Yong's intelligence. The moment the continuous gunshots rang out, who knew how many people were completely dumbfounded? The sudden appearance of a firearm that wasn't a firearm and a concealed weapon that wasn't a concealed weapon and possessed such great lethality, for a moment, many people's minds became blank. When Yang Chendong raised his gun and fired again, they were like fixed targets, allowing the bullets to hit their bodies. They didn't even know how to dodge. Continuous gunshots rang out, and the 5 forest warriors closest to the carriage fell to the ground with blood all over their bodies. Then the muzzle shifted, and the black muzzle once again spewed out a red light, aiming at those forest warriors who were still in a daze and at a loss of what to do. The copper whip was propped up on the ground, and Wang Gui's old face was already wrinkled together. He had roamed the underworld for more than 30 years, and believed that he had seen and heard many things, but everything that happened in front of him was still beyond his imagination. He never even thought that there would be such a thing today. When Yang Chendong moved the gun towards him, he was still standing there in a daze. Then, gunshots rang out, and Wang Gue, who had been shot 3 times in the chest, naturally fell backward. But he only fell backwards, and didn't really fall down. Wu Yong, who was hiding behind him, supported him. So, a dazzling firework soared into the sky, which was suddenly released from Wu Yong's hand. He thought of what Yin Tao had said to him. If things were difficult, he still had a backup plan. At that time, he could catch the Duke of Loyalty in one fell swoop. Previously, he had almost forgotten about this matter. Now that he didn't know if the fireworks would have any effect, he could only wait for the results. It didn't matter if he died, but if he couldn't kill Yang Chendong, even if he died, he wouldn't have the face to see his big brother and third brother. With Wang Gue dead, the Greenwood man who was walking in front of the carriage and preparing to attack also woke up and began to rapidly retreat. In this regard, Yang Chendong did not chase after them, nor did he shoot. Instead, he looked at these people nervously, as if he would not shoot if they did not force him. The moment the gunshots rang out, Beta Persei also took the opportunity to withdraw from the battlefield. He avoided the entanglement of Silver Spear Song Gang and Dragon Hand Li Zixing and returned to the carriage. The other 5 3-man teams were also moving closer to the carriage, with a look of vigilance on their faces. Why did he stop fighting? Silver Spear Song Gang walked to Wu Yong's side and asked with a frown when he saw the bodies of more than a dozen of his companions on the ground. Maybe there aren't many bullets left in his gun. Wu Yong shook his head and said in an uncertain tone, Then what are we waiting for? Since there aren't many bullets left, let's just swarm him and see how many of our brothers he can kill. Dragon Hand Li Zixing had a ruthless expression on his face. Obviously, as a famous master in Jianghu, it would be too embarrassing if they couldn't even kill a target of more than a dozen people with the power of hundreds of people. As soon as Li Zixing finished speaking, he received a few supercilious looks. It was as if they wanted to charge at him. Although it was true that these people were from the Jianghu, they were also known as the heroes of the forest by others. Some of them had even committed murder, giving people the impression that they were extremely vicious. However, there was one thing that could not be changed, and that was that they were still very afraid of death deep down in their bones. Otherwise, they could have swarmed him together instead of fighting and probing him. After speaking, Li Zixing knew that everyone was looking down on him, so he didn't speak anymore with a red face. After all, his words just now were a bit impulsive. It was normal for him to receive supercilious looks from others. On the other hand, Silver Spear Song Gang couldn't help but ask, Brother Wu, then what are we doing here? Waiting. This time, Wu Yong's tone was incomparably firm. Just now, the signal of fireworks had been released. Next, it was time to see what Yin Tao's backup plan was. He hoped that it wouldn't disappoint him. Wu Yong and the others didn't run. They just fled and didn't fight. They just faintly formed a fan and blocked the way. In this regard, Yang Chendong and the others didn't charge or retreat, nor did they shoot. It was as if they were waiting for something. The only difference was that Wu Yong's expression was relatively calm. Under Yang Chendong's calm appearance, there would occasionally be a hint of anxiety in his eyes. Time passed by minute. After about a quarter of an hour, a heavy sound came from the ground. The first thing that resonated was the sudden neighing of the war horses pulling the luxurious carriage. A group of horses is coming. The sudden movement caused the two sides to become restless. Everyone couldn't help but look in the direction of the capital, wanting to see who was coming. Some of the mercenaries were even prepared to run. They were just here to earn some extra money. They didn't want to lose their lives here. As for whether they could escape or not, they were still confident in being surrounded by dense forests. The sound of the horses behind them was getting closer and closer. Yang Chendong, who was sitting in the carriage, suddenly relaxed. With a wave of his right hand, he took out a brand new magazine and inserted it into the machine. Not only him, Beta Persei, and the other 15 members of the Cold Front also took out the spears on their backs and began to check their equipment. All these movements were so skillful and natural. Wu Yong suddenly had a bad feeling when he saw the way they acted, as if there was no one else around. Could it be that the other party has something to rely on? Or is it that while I'm waiting, the other party is also waiting? This thought only flashed through Wu Yong's mind for a moment before disappearing. In the end, he knew too little about firearms. If it had been an opponent like Shi Hong, he would have already fled to God knows where the moment the squad opened fire with the machine gun. Wu Yong, who still had the advantage in numbers, was still hoping that this group of horses might be reinforcements from the loyal Duke. Otherwise, why would the other party be so calm? However, he didn't know what the other party would do after he released the fireworks. The two sides were still in a standoff. The outline of the horse group behind them was gradually becoming clearer. After some time, it finally appeared in front of everyone. It was a group of horses dressed entirely in black. From a distance, it looked like there were about 50 of them. In ancient times, war horses were very rare and expensive, especially in the Central Plains. Most of the war horses needed to be purchased from the northern grasslands. As time passed, the price would often increase by a few times. To be able to take out 50 war horses at once, it was obvious that this person's identity was extraordinary. They're all here. The horse group was getting closer and closer until they stopped about 100 steps away from Yang Chendong. At this distance, it was already within the range of an arrow. At that time, an arrow could be shot about 130 steps away. At this distance, even an ordinary bow and arrow could have a considerable lethality. At such a close distance, the carriage might only need to charge down and tear Yang Chendong and the others to pieces. The leader of the horse group, who was actually a young man, seemed to know this result and reason. He laughed heartily. Yang Chendong narrowed his eyes for a moment when the person greeted him so enthusiastically. Obviously, he didn't recognize the other party. It was only when Yang Er leaned forward and whispered something that he nodded as if he suddenly realized something. So it's young Master Yu. I really didn't expect that the person behind today's big battle was actually you. The person who came was Yu Yunbi, the eldest grandson of Minister Yu Shiyue of the Ministry of Justice. He was also the backup that Yin Tao mentioned. That day, Yin Tao went to the Yu mansion to seek an audience with Minister Yu. He said that Wu Yong wanted to deal with Yang Chendong. As one of the chief constables, how could Yin Tao not know about the enmity between Minister Yu and the Duke of Loyalty? Even the third young master, Yu Xiong, had died because of this. This was an irreconcilable enmity. Perhaps Yin Tao knew that it was unrealistic to rely on Wu Yong to deal with Yang Chendong. Or perhaps he was optimistic about Yu Shiyue's position and wanted to climb up. In short, he told him everything about Wu Yong. He even made another decision. Even if Minister Yu did not want to deal with Yang Chendong, he could also kill Wu Yong and send his head to Minister Yu. This could be considered a merit. However, how could Yu Shiyue not see that there was a death feud between him and Yang Chendong? Because his grandson, who was the third in line, had been executed, many officials in the Ministry of Justice looked at him differently now. There was also the newly promoted left assistant minister, Su Yozhen, who took advantage of this to gain a lot of power. The Ministry of Justice was no longer in the era where he had the final say. All of this was because of Yang Chendong. If this person died, he would still be put in an important position because of the emperor's favor, and the Yu family would be able to regain its former glory. He understood this in his heart, but how could he kill Yang Chendong? Could he kill him? What would the situation be if he killed him? These were all things that Yu Shiyue had to think about. Just like Yang Chendong, he naturally had the ability to kill any important minister. But why didn't he do so? It was because he had a lot of scruples. The safety of the important ministers was not guaranteed. Once it became a situation where everyone was in danger, these people might join hands to deal with him. Chapter 323. After all, officialdom had its own rules. You could use open schemes, or even framing and framing. However, you couldn't directly go up to someone's door. That would only show that you were rude and had no standards. More importantly, this kind of straightforward method was not what scholars liked. It would be looked down upon by everyone, and everyone would be on guard against it. If that happened, it would be difficult to develop any further. When the opportunity was right, everyone would be in danger, and it was not impossible for them to gang up on him. However, was Yang Chendong a scholar? He wrote a good poem and was very talented in music. He was a scholar at a young age and was conferred the title of High Scholar by the Daizong Emperor. He even opened his own school and was a descendant of one of the three Yangs. It seemed that no matter his background or experience, he could be considered a member of the literati. However, his actions of leading troops to war and flourishing business were different from other literati. Therefore, it was really a matter of opinion whether he was a literati or not. If Yang Chendong was not a scholar, then there was a chance to kill 100 people. It was a way to solve the problem. Yin Tao's arrival made Yu Shiyue's heart move. However, the other party was only a small official, so he left the matter to his eldest grandson, Yu Yunbi. Firstly, it could be used to train him. Secondly, if something really happened, he could hide behind him and help clean up the mess. In the end, although Yang Chendong had the title of Duke, he was still too young. Offering potatoes to start his career could be attributed to luck. Saving Ingzong and retreating from the Walla was also the work of the mercenaries. What really happened to Yang Chendong didn't seem to be anything special. Yu Yunbi naturally saw hope when Yu Shiyue let go of the matter. Compared to his grandfather's indifference, he quickly became familiar with Yin Tao and thought of several plans to assassinate Yang Chendong. However, no one expected that Yang Chendong would suddenly enter the city because of Li Qing. This sudden change also caught Yu Yunbi off guard. After meeting up with Yin Tao, the two of them thought that the opportunity had come. They immediately notified Wu Yong to make preparations. Yu Yunbi, on the other hand, went to the embroidered uniform guards and found an expert who was close to him. If things didn't go well, he would be the backup attack. However, no one knew that because he wanted to make things perfect, he gave himself away. Coincidentally, when Yunb was mobilizing his troops, he was discovered by Tang Tong, who was sleeping in his room. He vaguely heard his colleagues say that young Master Yu invited him to the south of the city. Tang Tong, who was still in a daze, jumped up. The relationship between the Duke of Loyalty and the Minister of the Ministry of Justice was not good. Everyone in the court knew that there was a great enmity between them. Even some of the people below had heard some rumors. As a member of the embroidered uniform guard, Tang Tong's master. Not only that, his life was saved by Yang Chendong, so he naturally paid more attention to his benefactor's matters. When Tang Tong heard the news, he got up, put on his clothes, and went straight to a tea house outside the embroidered uniform guard's residence. He knew that the owner of the tea house was a spy under the Duke of Loyalty. Thus, after Yang Chendong left the Yongding Gate, people from the security bureau caught up with him and gave him information. After getting the information in advance, Tiger's Man and Beta Persei advised him to stop and wait until he returned to the city to transfer Commander Tang Shan's Lung Feng and the security bureau's Wolf Fang action team before returning to the Yang village. However, all of this was rejected by Yang Chendong. In his words, it was a blessing, not a curse. Not to mention, they had already gotten the information in advance. They only needed to prepare more, and there would be nothing to worry about. Since they wanted to deal with him, he naturally had to fight back. In order to prevent others from making irresponsible remarks, he needed irrefutable evidence. Thus, there was the scene in front of him, where Yang Chendong, Yunb, and Wu Yong met. At this moment, Yang Chendong, who was surrounded from two sides, didn't seem to be in a good situation. Especially when Yunb smiled and waved his hand. The 50 elite cavalrymen he brought all took out exquisite military bows and crossbows. It almost sealed the opponent's victory. Military bows and crossbows not only had a long range, but were also relatively accurate. The cost of such things wasn't low, and often only the most elite troops were equipped with them. But now, they actually appeared behind Yunb. When Yang Chendong saw this scene, his expression changed slightly. What a powerful method. I don't think you have this ability. It must be your grandfather who helped you. After all, to be able to take out such a good bow and crossbow, the average Ministry of War official's ability would be insufficient. Only those above the 4th rank could barely do it. Haha, you don't have to worry about that, Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Yunb laughed proudly. I've long heard that Duke of Loyalty and Courage can kill people with a wave of your finger and repel the Walla army with a wave of your hand. But I don't know how you're going to solve such a small situation today. Or can you still wave your hand and conquer the world? Oh, are you interested in this matter? Yang Chendong's voice came out in time. The tension on his face eased a lot, and he looked at Yunb with interest. Originally, Yunb wanted to use this opportunity to ridicule Yang Chendong. It had been proven that those things were done by the mercenaries in private. He just waved his hand. How could there be any sorcery? Who would die with a wave of his hand? Yunb wanted to ridicule him, but now Yang Chendong actually accepted it. It seemed that he still wanted to show off. This made Yunb have a bad feeling in his heart. But soon he shook his head and threw the uneasiness in his heart to the back of his mind. This operation was so sudden that even he didn't prepare in advance. How could Yang Chendong know about it? He must be saying this to scare him. Yes, to scare him. As if seeing through Yang Chendong's plot, Yunb laughed. What a Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Are you still thinking of stalling for time at this time? Come on, get ready. Yunb should have been afraid, but Yang Chendong's expression was too calm, giving Yunb an extremely bad feeling. He wanted to get this matter over with as soon as possible. Following his shout, Wu Yong and the other mercenaries also raised the weapons in their hands. The mercenaries who had been frightened by the gunshots a moment ago were reinvigorated by Yunb's arrival and those exquisite crossbows. They might not have been able to face difficulties head-on, but they had no problem beating down a drowning dog. Why don't you believe me? Seeing that Yunb was about to lose control and make a move, Yang Chendong shook his head slightly and casually extended a finger. If Hu Yin and the others were here, they would have definitely noticed that this gesture was very similar to the one he had used to point at the traitor eunuch, Xining, on the walls of the capital. It was also this finger that caused Yunbi, who was still riding on his horse, to feel pain all over his body. He fell off his horse with a plop. Yunbi fell off his horse with a casual finger strike. At this moment, the other black-clothed men were all stunned on the spot. Not only them, but even their allies, Wu Yong and the others, who were standing on the opposite side, also widened their eyes in disbelief. Some of the mercenaries might have heard too many stories, and they even thought that this was the one young finger of the Loyal and Courage Guild. Why did a single finger have the effect of killing people from a distance? They were all stunned, but Yang Chendong was not stunned. Beta Persei and his 15 subordinates were also not stunned. Attack! A roar came from his mouth, and then the loaded bullets flew toward the 50 men in black. The sudden sound of gunfire and Yunbi falling off his horse caused the entire cavalry to fall into chaos. Most of them were shot down from their horses by the first wave of gunfire. Only a very small number of people fired their crossbows at the surroundings of the carriage, but they also lost their aim from far away. After the first wave of crossbow fire, a few of the men in black turned around and ran. But when he turned around, he discovered that there was another group of horses behind him. Although there weren't many of them, the leader was none other than Hu Meng. They held a black Type 95 submachine gun in their hands and attacked head-on. No matter how powerful a cold weapon was, when faced with a hot weapon from a distance, the advantage would be lost. The so-called experts in TV shows and movies could soar into the air and dodge bullets, but that was pure nonsense. Such a thing might happen, but it was usually because the shooter's marksmanship was not good enough. But those who could follow Yang Chendong were all elites of the cold front. To be able to become a qualified cold vanguard, which one of them hadn't been fed countless bullets to become one, the munitions factory in Crimson City could already produce enough bullets. If they could not reach the level of a sharpshooter, then they did not have the right to call themselves Cold Front. With the appearance of Tiger, Mane, and the first guard Captain Chiu Vi, it was destined that none of the men in black would be able to escape. Yang Chendong and the others gave up on the battlefield and turned to look at Wu Yong and the others. The moment the gunshots rang out, Wu Yong and the others were already scared out of their wits. If Yang Chendong was the only one with a gun, they could still fight. After all, firearms were not things that could be fired forever and needed to be reloaded. This was their chance to charge and attack. But when they saw that it was not only Yang Chendong, but the other brothers also raised their guns and fired, and spat out red flames, the last bit of hope in their hearts disappeared. Everyone wanted to escape and leave this place. They did not want to be enemies with these unknown firearms in the future. Chapter 324. The mercenaries decisively turned around and left. Wu Yong knew that something big was about to happen. Even if he stayed behind to charge, he would only be risking his life. With a trace of reluctance in his heart, he turned around and followed everyone into the dense forest on both sides. Puff, puff, puff. Sniper rifles with silencers began to fire, and the ghost sniper was fired. During the quarter of an hour when Yang Chendong and Wu Yong confronted each other, they received orders and completed the hidden mission of preparing to attack. Now it was time for them to kill in all directions. Not only was there the ghost sniper team, but this time, even the Wolfang action team, temporarily stationed in the security bureau, had been waiting in the dense forest for a long time. They were waiting for these self-proclaimed mercenaries to barge in and give them a head-on blow. This was the strongest force that Yang Chendong could transfer in a short period of time. Perhaps it would not be easy to leave the scores of more than 100 people behind, but at least he could kill most of them and let them make a name for himself. Endless slaughter unfolded in the forest. Every gunshot could mean the loss of a life. Every scream could mean the end of a life. Yang Chendong did not look at the forest. He got off the carriage and, under the protection of Beta Persei and the others, he strode to Yunbi, who was lying on the ground with a gunshot in his leg. "Save me, save me." Yunbi, who was still arrogant just now, was now pale. It was caused by excessive blood loss and excessive shock. "Don't worry, you won't die. At least not yet," Yang Chendong said coldly. He squatted down and then touched the muzzle of the gun in his leg with his right hand. It looked like he was checking the injury, But when he was about to touch the wound, he used more strength. Ah! Under the force, Yunbi could not help but howl, pain, pain. Now that you know how painful it is, tell me, who else wants to murder me other than you? Does your grandfather know? Yang Chenong wanted to get the evidence as soon as possible, and he also wanted to keep an eye on the people involved. Since they wanted to assassinate him, they had to be prepared for a backlash. Yunbi's face was dripping with sweat, and his facial features were scrunched together. However, he also knew that he could not betray his grandfather. Otherwise, there would be no hope at all. But looking at Yang Chendong's face, if he didn't say something, it would be impossible for him to pass. So he suppressed the pain and said, "And Chief Constable Yin Tao, he informed me that the remaining members of the Black Water Gang wanted to harm you. So I wanted to avenge my third brother. Yin Tao, catch him." Finally, Yang Chenong heard some useful information. Only then did he loosen his grip that was like a vice. Just as he finished speaking, a member of the Cold Vanguard team, who was in charge of delivering the news, rode towards the city. In the dense forest, the originally quiet scene was no longer there, and it was replaced by the smell of blood. Just as Yang Chendong had expected, under their hasty preparations, they did not manage to take down all of the forest men. About a dozen of them managed to escape. Among them, the leader, Wu Yong, and Li Zixing, the Dragon Hand, managed to escape amidst the chaos. On the other hand, Silver Spear Song Gang and the others were killed by Lung Feng in the forest. The noisy official road quickly regained its tranquility. Tiger's Mane and the others even got some water to do a simple cleaning. From afar, it looked as if nothing had happened. But in reality, a dark cloud was looming over the capital. Yin Tao was on duty today, but even so, he was distracted. Even when some of his subordinates came to report on their work, he did not know what they said. Finally, it was time for dinner, and he could finally take a break. He changed into an ordinary cloth robe and walked out of the Ministry of Justice's yamen. Just as he left the street and was about to go to the U residence to ask for clarification, his intuition told him that he was being followed. As one of the 4 chief detectives of the Ministry of Justice, Yin Tao's thoughts were extremely meticulous. He was also a martial arts expert and had done this kind of work countless times. Now that someone was suddenly following him, how could he not notice it? Being suddenly followed was not the first time something like this had happened. He had handled countless cases, and he had offended many people. But today, on such a sensitive day, someone was following him. This seemed to have a different meaning than usual. After thinking about it for an entire day, there was still no news from Yunbi. Could it be that he had forgotten about it after his great victory? But that shouldn't be the case. If something really happened to the Duke of Loyalty, it would definitely cause a commotion in the capital. There was no reason for him not to know. Could it be that Yunbi had failed, and not only that, he had also sold him out? Yin Tao had never held much hope for the so-called young master of an aristocratic family. These people were like insects, growing up under the shadow of their family. They did not know the pain of a small figure, and they did not know the difficulties of life. It was because all they saw was wealth, stability, and even luxury. Once they were faced with a bad environment, the psychological gap would be even greater. With such a mentality, it was hard to guarantee that they would not say anything. His mind was quickly thinking about the possibilities. If that was the case, then the person who sent the person should be the Duke of Loyalty's subordinate. He could not help but feel a chill in his heart, but his footsteps did not stop at all. He continued to walk toward his original destination, the U Mansion. Whether the person was sent by Yang Chendong or not, this trip to the U Mansion had to be made. At least, he had to inquire about Yunbi's whereabouts. If he was safe at home, then he would be safe. On the other hand, if something happened to him, then the identity of the person behind him would be revealed. With this thought in mind, Yin Tao walked forward as if he hadn't noticed anything. After a few streets, he came to the side door of the U Mansion. There were servants guarding there. Naturally, they were already familiar with the chief of detectives and opened the door to let him in. The tail behind him stopped at this point. However, he did not leave. Instead, he continued to stare at the door, waiting for Yin Tao to come out. Then, when the sky was dark, he would naturally take action to subdue the other party when there was a suitable opportunity. In the U Mansion, the lights in the main hall were on. When Yin Tao arrived, he saw the gloomy face of the Minister of Justice, Yu Shiyue. "Greetings, Minister." Yin Tao entered the door and knelt on one knee. "Get up. What's the situation? Why hasn't Yuanbi returned home yet?" As soon as Yu Shiyue spoke, Yin Tao had an extremely bad feeling in his heart. Young village. In the basement, Yuanbi was simply treated and tied to a wooden frame. Opposite him, Yang Chendong sat on a wooden chair and looked up at this person with interest. He admired this young man who had the courage to kill him, but at the same time, he wanted to scold him for his stupidity. If he was so easy to kill, the first person to do it would have been Zhu Qiyu, the acting grandmaster. How could anyone else have a chance? The wound was simply treated and the bullet was taken out. When the bullet was placed on the copper plate, a crisp, tinkling sound rang out. Yuanbi's entire body involuntarily trembled. This also made his divine sense seem to have sobered up a lot at this moment. How is it? Is it very painful? Sigh, life is like this. There is always some pain to let a person see the truth more clearly. Just like what you did today, it was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. I really don't know what you were thinking. Did you think that you could kill me just because you brought some light cavalry and some crossbows? People always have to pay the price for their actions. Now that you've been captured, your life is in my hands. Can you say something? Perhaps I'll even consider giving you a quick death. How about it? Yang Chendong spoke unhurriedly, as if he was criticizing the other party. He was also amazed by the other party's actions, or perhaps he was calling him stupid. However, it wasn't until the last sentence that his true intention was revealed. However, after this sentence, one could see that Yuanbi's expression had clearly become much uglier. If he said that he would give him a quick death, wouldn't that mean that he would die regardless of whether he said it or not? Of course, he didn't want to die. He had a grandfather who was a minister and was now a sixth-rank official in the imperial court. He was also young and could be said to have a bright future. How could he die? He didn't know what kind of darkness he would experience after death. Everything he had now would end, and he would lose it all. At this moment, he didn't know whether it was because of fear or because it aroused his heroic spirit. He suddenly changed his weak appearance and shouted loudly, "No, you can't kill me. My grandfather won't let you go if he knows. I'm an official of the imperial court. If you kill me, you'll offend the law. Even the emperor won't tolerate it. Let me go, let me go. Otherwise, I'll flatten your young village and kill everyone in your young family." Yuanbi was still shouting hysterically, roaring threats several times. Yang Chendong could no longer hear all of this. After turning around and leaving the basement, he said to Yang Lu, who was guarding here, "Send someone to accompany him. There's no need to torture him. Just don't let him sleep. When he's sleepy, splash him with cold water. He'll talk." The exhaustive interrogation method had long been proven to be one of the most useful interrogation methods in later generations. However, because the process was too inhumane, it had been banned for many years. However, it was now the Great Ming dynasty, so naturally, no one would pursue this matter. After handing over the matter to Yang Lu, Yang Chendong returned to the inner courtyard. He was greeted by his wife, Hu Yin, second Madame Xiao Yin, and seventh sister Yang Duo who were in the village. There was a trace of kindness and anxiety in their eyes. But in the end, Hu Yin asked, "What happened?" "I saw Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei kneeling at the gate." Chapter 325. It's fine. Yang Chendong showed an extremely bright and clean smile. It's just a small matter. They willingly accepted the punishment. By the way, what delicious food did you make today? Ask someone to bring it out. Lu Lang will have dinner with you in a while. Knowing that Yang Chendong intended to send them away, Hu Yin and the other two girls still wanted to say something, but considering that the man had to do great things, they all obediently nodded and followed Hu Yin to the kitchen. When Xiaoyin walked past Yang Chendong, she said in a mosquito-like voice, "Don't be too harsh." Yang Chendong could not help but smile. Among the girls, only Xiaoyin had trained with him in cold front before, so she naturally knew his methods. For this reason, it was normal to have such worries. It was just that Beta Persei's performance today was really disappointing. If they had not received the news in advance and made some preparations, it was hard to say what the result would have been. Learning from the mistakes of others, there were some problems that needed to be properly discussed. At the gate in front of the inner courtyard, there were several rows of people kneeling in neat rows. This might be the benefit of strict training. Even when they were kneeling, they were so neat that no one could find any fault with it. The runners were led by Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei. Behind them were the first guard team's Captain Xiu Vi, the Wolfang team's Captain Tai Hu, and the Ghost Sniper team's captained by Zhua. The third row was the team members under these people, the elites of Cold Front. These people were all members of Cold Front who participated in today's operation. Although time was a little short, they were prepared. However, some people still managed to escape. For this matter, without waiting for Yang Chendong to say anything, Tiger's Mane and the others took the initiative to kneel here and beg for forgiveness. When Yang Chendong walked out of the gate, Tiger's Mane and the others raised their heads, but when they saw Dong Shuai's expression, they quickly lowered their heads. Many of these people were personally taught by Yang Chendong, and some were trained according to his principles. They could all be considered as his students. As a teacher, he usually tried his best to maintain a friendly side. However, no matter what he did, due to the difference in status, there was always a gap between Yang Chendong and the rest. Perhaps this gap wasn't that big. In fact, it was very small. However, the gap still existed. No one dared to ignore this point, and no one dared to deny it. Now, Yang Chendong's expression was only slightly unpleasant, but Tiger's Mane and the others were so frightened that they lowered their heads like children who had done something wrong, waiting for the adults to punish them. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. For more than 10 breaths of time, Yang Chendong didn't say a word. A tense atmosphere unknowingly filled the space. This kind of silence was often the calm before the storm, the prelude to the arrival of the storm. You all disappoint me. Finally, after a short period of silence, Yang Chendong spoke. When he opened his mouth to speak, a wave of pressure surged into everyone's body. That kind of feeling was like being pressed down by a 10,000-kilogram rock, giving birth to a feeling of suffocation. I was wrong to wait. Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others bowed their heads and admitted their mistakes shortly after Yang Chendong's words, as if they had turned over a new leaf. Wrong? Are you really wrong? All right, Beta Persei, let me ask you, where did you go wrong? Yang Chendong's voice seemed to be very casual, but the anger in his voice was getting stronger. Beta Persei, who was called out, was stunned at first. He was tall and extremely skilled. He was one of Yang Chendong's most trusted guards and was often brought along to protect him. In the Yang family system, anyone who saw him would be very respectful. However, this person also had a minor problem, which was that he didn't know how to speak. When he suddenly spoke, his voice was like thunder, which had frightened countless people. Because of this, he usually tried his best not to speak if he could. Yang Chendong asked him to say where he went wrong. This made Beta Persei very confused, but since it was the young master who asked, he certainly couldn't not answer. My mistake, clang. A kick suddenly came and kicked Beta Persei's strong body. The powerful force made him unable to stand steadily and his body tilted to the side, almost falling to the ground. When he felt that the kick was from the young master, he tried to straighten his body, and his face was a little happier than before. Corporal punishment. It was the method that Yang Chendong used to train the first batch of Lung Feng. At that time, they were still in the Yang family manor in Jianing, and it was already 2 years ago. It was also because of the corporal punishment along the way that these uncultured, boorish men learned their lesson and finally grew up. He still remembered that at that time, when anyone was kicked or punched by the sixth young master, not only would they not feel pain, but they would also be very happy. This represented the sixth young master's love for them, because if he didn't even want to hit you, perhaps it represented a kind of disappointment. More than 2 years later, he was kicked by the sixth young master again. Beta Persei's eyes and heart were only filled with joy and excitement. You don't even know where you went wrong, and you keep saying that you were wrong? Have you really thought about it? After the kick, Yang Chendong's angry voice rang out. Yes, young master, I was wrong. Beta Persei didn't seem to understand the meaning of Yang Chendong's words, and continued to express his sincerity and seriousness. Yes, you were wrong. Since you don't know where you went wrong today, the young master will tell you. But please remember, this is only the first time. If you make the same mistake again, then you and all the people who made the mistake will go back to Crimson City. Haven't you always wanted to go to the battlefield? There will be many opportunities there, and it should be suitable for you. Yang Chendong's voice was still a little high-pitched before, but when he talked about going back to Crimson City, his tone was much lower. Originally, Beta Persei was a little happy, thinking that after this kick, it would prove that the young master still cared about him, valued him, and trusted him. Look, now he was even helping to point out where he went wrong. Wasn't he? But when he heard that they were arranged to go back to Crimson City because of one more mistake, his expression changed drastically and his breathing became much heavier. He suddenly raised his head. Not only Beta Persei, Tiger's Mane, and the others also raised their heads, looking at Yang Chendong with fear and nervousness. Some of them wanted to go to the battlefield, wanted to gallop there, and wanted to kill the enemy to their heart's content. However, if he was chased away by the young master in order to fulfill his dream, then the meaning was completely different. When that time came, what would the other Longfeng brothers think of them for making a mistake? If they couldn't even protect the young master, wouldn't it mean that they were incompetent? In the eyes of Longfeng, what could be more important than protecting the young master? Everyone felt as if a heavy hammer had struck them at this moment, and their expressions became incomparably solemn. They finally felt that the young master didn't seem to be joking with them, but was serious. After thinking it through, everyone's expression became extremely serious. They didn't dare to be the slightest bit careless, and their ears pricked up at this moment, as if they were afraid of missing a single word. Report, Yang San is here. Just as the atmosphere in front of the courtyard became incomparably solemn, Yang Wu, who was in charge of the security of the periphery of Yang Village, came to the door of the inner courtyard. He acted as if he didn't see Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others kneeling on the ground, but his heart was beating like a drum, and he didn't know what had happened. Bring him here. Yang Chendong thought that the security bureau really needed to be taught a lesson. They didn't even get any information about this incident, and this alone made them unqualified. After getting permission, Yang San quickly came to the gate of the inner courtyard. When he saw Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others kneeling, there was a trace of surprise on his face, but soon he also knelt on the ground, lowered his head and said, "Your subordinate is incompetent. Yin Tao escaped." Escaped? Ha ha, ha ha ha, not bad, not bad. Yang San's appearance made Yang Chendong laugh incessantly, and the atmosphere seemed to become even more tense at this moment. Yang San came this time with the intention of being criticized, but he didn't expect Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei to be kneeling there. At this moment, he naturally knelt with them and lowered his head. There was one more person in the line. No, there were two more people, and Yang Wu also knelt in the first row. Although he still didn't know what had happened, he thought that not everyone could hear the young master's lesson. The kneeling crowd seemed to have grown a little, but it was quieter than before, which made Yang Chendong's voice even more deafening at this moment. Let's talk about Beta Persei first. You're very good at fighting, aren't you? You clearly know that the people who came are all from the underworld and have learned pure martial arts since young. When you fought with them, you didn't use your killing move right away, but instead countered their moves. You fought with them for a full 30 rounds, but you didn't kill a single person. You only injured Silver Spear Song Gang. Where do you think the other comrades on the battlefield are? Is this your one-man show? Or do you think that this is a martial arts arena, where friendship comes first and competition comes second? You should know that if it weren't for the fact that the other comrades fought with all their strength and 4 of our brothers were injured, the battle line would have collapsed. At that time, even if you learned some things in the process of fighting, it was indeed equivalent to stepping on the corpses of other comrades. Do you feel guilty? Iron Tiger, as the captain of the Wolf Fong Special Forces, you didn't kill them immediately in the dense forest. Instead, you played a game of cat and mouse. In the end, more than a dozen of your opponents escaped. Let me ask you, is it fun to be a cat? Is it fun to watch your opponents have a mental breakdown? So much so that you don't even care if your opponents escape? Do you remember that the young master said that being kind to your opponents is being cruel to yourself? Do you know that in the future, because of those who escaped, it is very likely that our comrades will be harmed by them? And all of this is caused by your momentary playfulness? If you really like this kind of game so much, there are still many mice in the Yang family village. You can catch them all like a cat. Chapter 326. By Zhua. As the king of sniping, you and the entire Go Sniper squad are responsible for long-range attacks. It was killing people invisibly, killing people from 1,000 meters away. But what did you do? Other than killing some opponents in the first and second rounds, you actually gave up on your best spear technique and changed to bayonets to charge at the opponents just to test your close-range abilities. Not only did you escape from the opponents, but you also injured 2 of your brothers. Whose fault is this? Yang-san, I've told you before that intelligence work is very important and even plays an important role in the overall situation. You are everyone's clairvoyant eyes and ears. But what did you do? Other than the loopholes in your intelligence, you even lost information about a person. Do you know how much the Security Bureau has invested in you compared to other comrades in terms of money, reputation, and other aspects? You can't get enough returns from your generous investment. If that's the case, and you still can't do a good job, then you can only be replaced. You can go back to Crimson City and join the Public Security Bureau. There seems to be a criminal police captain there, so you are suitable. There's also Tiger's Mane. According to the previous plan, after you and Chovy appeared, you would charge at the enemy's rear like a gust of wind sweeping the fallen leaves. After that, you would charge at the enemy on horseback and use the advantage of your warhorse to wipe out all the enemies in one fell swoop. But what did you do? All of you stood in front of me and scared the enemies away. What's the use of standing in front of young master? To be a door god? If that's the case, Crimson City's gate will lack 2 suitable gatekeepers. You guys can fill this gap. In a short while, Yang Chenong said a lot. Almost all of the people kneeling here were mentioned. Even Yang Wu, who came later, was reprimanded. He said that recently, the cold vanguard outside Yang Village had become more and more lazy. In the past, they were required to be alerted if there was an enemy within 10 miles. But now, they only noticed when the enemy was 5 miles away. Passive defense would never be as effective as taking the initiative to attack, and it would be more proactive. After a round of scolding, he pointed out some of the shortcomings that were gradually revealed. For example, arrogance, self-righteousness, disobedience, adventurous, lack of consideration for the overall situation, selfishness, disregard for the safety of their comrades, and so on. This was not a sudden thought. After living peacefully in the Yang family village for so long, everyone's spirit had indeed become lazy. They thought that they had the strongest weapon in the world and had gone through strict training, so they were truly invincible. But he really didn't know that arrogance could easily lead to death. He really didn't know that arrogance made people fall behind, and falling behind meant being beaten. Taking advantage of today's opportunity, Yang Chendong taught everyone a lesson. If the tree is not repaired, it will not be straight. If the person is not repaired, he will be valiant. No matter how strong a person was, if they were arrogant to the point of looking down on everything, then they wouldn't be far from being defeated. From today onwards, start criticizing others and yourself. Everyone was required to participate, and before they completely recognized their mistakes, their daily training sessions would be doubled, and those who did not achieve excellent results would have their meals reduced by half. For the 3rd time in a row, his results were still the worst. Thus, he left the Yang clan manor and returned to Crimson City. His original honor as the Cold Front was revoked, and he was promoted to a civil servant. The rest of the people will return to their normal training state when they recognize their own shortcomings and pass the approval of their comrades. After dropping these words coldly, Yang Chendong turned around and walked into the inner courtyard. Just as he was leaving, he waved his hand and called Tiger's Man and the deputy director of the Security Bureau, Yang San. Criticism and self-criticism were the class meetings in the modern army. During training, even if they were busy, they had to take time out every day to have a small meeting. Often, it would be based on the class as a unit. The squad leader would first self-criticize and criticize others, then the squad leader, and so on for every soldier. This practice could make people more aware of their own shortcomings and also better understand their comrades around them. They could constantly improve from pointing out the shortcomings, and it could also increase the friendship between comrades. It had been proven that this was a very good way to train soldiers. Yang Chendong didn't use it before because he was afraid that it would be too much of a blow to everyone's fighting spirit. But through today's matter, it was indeed necessary to do so. Even with such advanced weapons, they had still let more than 10 enemies escape. This was enough to prove that the deciding factor of victory was not the advanced weapons, but the fighting spirit and the hearts of the people. It was believed that through criticism and self-criticism, everyone would have a string in their minds that would lower the chances of them making a mistake to the lowest. They would be able to make Cold Front stronger and faster. Yang Chendong walked at the front until he reached the garden in the inner courtyard. Tiger's Man and Yang San followed carefully behind him. They weren't afraid of the harsh training, nor were they afraid of the mountains of swords and seas of fire, but they were afraid of being sent back to Crimson City. For old people like them, they were the most outstanding and powerful existences in Long Feng's eyes, and were even idols in the eyes of some people. If they were really sent back to Crimson City, then it would be a failure in life. No one would look up to them anymore, and there would be no hope for them in life. The work of the Security Bureau needs to be improved, and the people under us also need to undergo more systematic and hard training. Tiger's Man also needs to be improved. As a new member, he must achieve excellent results. If he can't, then he will be sent back to Crimson City. This isn't a joke. Sometimes, one wrong step can affect everyone, and all the previous efforts will be wasted. Do you understand? When Yang Chendong's words were heard by Tiger's Man and Yang San, the two of them nodded solemnly. They knew that this time, the young master was really expressing his dissatisfaction with the Security Bureau. If a similar situation were to occur in the future, their positions would probably be shifted. It was even possible that they would be sent back to Crimson City in accordance with military law. Knowing the seriousness of the matter, whether it was Tiger's Man or Yang San, they both secretly made up their minds. The Security Bureau had to be changed, or it would be destroyed. The seriousness of the two could be seen from their eyes. Yang Chendong knew the principle of too much, and did not mention the issue of rectification. Instead, he asked, "Tell me, where did Yin Tao go? Where did you lose him?" When it came to serious matters, Yang San's resolute voice sounded. Our people went to wait outside the Ministry of Justice's Yamen and saw Yin Tao go to Yu Shiyue's residence. After that, there was no news. Could it be that he spent the night there? Tiger's Man asked with a doubtful face. After all, it was only a short period of time, so it couldn't be said that they lost him. Impossible, because after that, the people we sent to follow him found Yin Tao. Speaking of which, the other party was too careless. He didn't know our standards of conduct and followed us in pairs. It was also because of the timely warning that Yin Tao felt that things were not going well. He didn't do anything to our people and hurriedly withdrew. When the subordinates came back to report, I was afraid that Yin Tao was going to escape. So I came to report to Young Master to see if we should dispatch the Wolfang Special Forces to capture this person. Yang San's tone was very respectful as he asked for instructions. After silently listening to this, Yang Chendong gently shook his head. Yin Tao was just a small fry who could not arouse his interest at all. On the other hand, Yu Shiyue, the Minister of Justice, had provoked him time and time again. This time, he even tried to assassinate him. If it wasn't for the effect of the chess piece called Tang Tong arranged in advance, he was afraid that he would have suffered a loss this time. And this repeated provocation was really intolerable. Get ready, there is no need for the Yu residents to exist, he just said faintly, as if talking to himself. But in the ears of Tiger's Mane and Yang San, they clearly knew what this meant. It might be a bit too much to say that it was pulling a tooth from the tiger's mouth, but in this way, it was tantamount to starting a war with the scholar group. Yu Shiyue was nothing, but he was after all a second-rank official in the imperial court. If he was defeated, it was unknown whether the other officials and scholars would have the thought of a fox mourning for the death of a rabbit and a heart of hatred for a common enemy. Although Yang Chendong's power had been rapidly developing in Qiqian City, the speed was fast enough to make anyone in the know speechless. But in the capital, he had always been very careful. Sometimes he looked arrogant, but when there was really a big matter, he would be calm and avoid confrontation with the entire noble family and the landowning class group. But this time, Yang Chendong finally decided to make a move. Maybe he was annoyed by the little guy jumping up and down, Maybe he was annoyed and wanted to end it once and for all. Or maybe he wanted to kill the chicken to warn the monkey. In short, this time he was going to make a move. Since he decided to make a move, what would happen next seemed to be predictable. During this period of time, the Security Bureau had not been idle. They had prepared a lot of things, enough to defeat Yushuriue. But after the defeat, what kind of situation would there be? Whether the so-called scholar group would fight back, to what extent, and whether they would really fight back, no one knew. But in any case, the will of the young master was the will of the entire Yangxie new army. His order was like the imperial edict of the great Ming emperor, unimpeded in Yangxie. The wind was coming. Yin Tao changed into an extremely ordinary set of clothes and left Cheng Shun in with some soft things. He had been exposed. No matter how he was found, one thing was clear, that if he did not leave, the Duke of Loyalty would not spare him. Although he was one of the chief detectives of the Ministry of Justice, in the eyes of ordinary people, he was already a superior existence, or someone who could not be provoked. But in the eyes of a big shot like Yang Qindong, he was not even a fart. Once Yang Qindong made a move, he might lose his life here before even seeing the person. This was definitely not what Yin Tao wanted. Chapter 327. He only had one choice, to leave the capital. Fortunately, the world was very large, and the insect was still in the south. Even if he couldn't, he still had quite a few of his fellow disciples in the south. As someone who had once roamed the Jianghu, he naturally didn't have to worry about survival. Even so, when he thought about the career he had worked so hard for, he still felt a sense of reluctance. But when he recalled the chaotic scene in the Yu residence, his reluctance was replaced by determination. Yunb had not returned home and had even cut off all contact with his family, causing the entire Yu residence to become tense. This was precisely what he had seen with his own eyes. Perhaps Yushuriue had already thought of a certain possibility. If Yin Tao didn't leave now, he probably wouldn't be able to. After looking around the room, he took in a deep breath and resolutely turned around, silently leaving the capital in the middle of the night. Back to the Yu residence. His eldest grandson, Yunb, had not returned home for an entire afternoon. The steward had sent people to the places where the young master would normally go, but they had still found nothing. When the steward reported this matter to his master, Yushuriue, this old man sitting in the academy seemed to have aged a great deal in a single afternoon. Got it, the housekeeper said weakly and left the room in silence. Soon after, there was the sound of things being smashed. This noise persisted for a long time, and then the room fell silent once more. By the time Yushuriue walked out of the study, he was dressed in his official robes. Prepare a carriage to go to the imperial palace. Yushuriue came to the imperial palace in the middle of the night and requested to see the emperor. Zhu Qiyu, who had been busy with court affairs this entire time, did not immediately see him. Instead, Chief Eunuch Jining stepped forward and used the excuse that the emperor was tired and had already gone to bed to refuse. During the day, Yunb had transferred several dozen experts from the embroidered uniform guard who were close to the Yu clan. While he might have been able to conceal it from others, he truly could not hide it from the eyes of Chief Eunuch Jining. But considering that Yushuriue was someone the emperor trusted, he did not stop him and instead reported the matter to acting sect master Zhu Qiyu. Beloved official Yu, what are you doing? Do you know where those people went? Zhu Qiyu was stunned. The embroidered uniform guards could be said to be the emperor's personal army, and they were directly under his jurisdiction. Someone had reached their hands into the embroidered uniform guards. Even if that person was a trusted courtier, as the emperor, he would naturally feel displeased. Jining organized her thoughts, then answered carefully, those people went outside the city, towards the south of the city. Oh. Zhu Qiyu seemed to have thought of something when she heard this. Then, she waved her hand as if she was not going to pursue the matter any further. To the side, Jining naturally wouldn't say anything. She could see that the emperor might have some feelings towards this loyal duke. She thought it would be good for someone else to knock some sense into him. The emperor didn't care, but that didn't mean Jining didn't care. As a close official of the emperor, there were many things that he needed to prepare for a rainy day. He couldn't just send people to investigate when something happened and the emperor asked him what happened, right? That kind of subject was not qualified and could not become a favored subject. Jining sent someone to wait until nightfall before news came back. The person who sent the person didn't see anything, but they smelled the scent of blood and found the scene of the murder. According to the report of an experienced spy from the East Factory, there had probably been a fierce battle and many people had died. People have died? A bloody battle? Jining formed an image in her mind. Then, she shook her head. Now, no one had come to the imperial palace to see the emperor. From the looks of it, that loyal duke should be fine. If Yang Chenong was fine, then Yu Shiriyue would be the only one at a disadvantage. She had a rough idea of what had happened. That night, Yu Shiriyue appeared. After knowing that his request to see the emperor was fruitless, this minister of justice, an important official of the current court, and one of the representatives of the scholar officials group, actually knelt down with a plop in front of Jining, the eunuch. Eunuch Jin, on account of my respect for you, I beg you to save my grandson. In the eyes of others, a eunuch was a hermaphrodite. Even if he had some power, it was difficult for him to enter the eyes of an important official. But now, Yu Shiriyue, who usually didn't even need to kneel when seeing the emperor, was kneeling in front of Jining. At this moment, Jining felt a sense of pride and satisfaction. Look, this was the so-called scholar officials. This was the so-called orthodox scholar officials. Now, wasn't he willing to kneel in front of a eunuch? But this feeling was fleeting. Jining quickly reached out to help Yu Shiriyue up. Aya, official Yu, what are you doing? This eunuch is just a eunuch, someone who serves the emperor. How can I receive such a great gift? You can. This time, my grandson has done something foolish. I'm afraid his life will be in danger. Eunuch Jin, please go find the loyal duke and ask him to release him. As for the conditions, this old man will agree. I will agree to all of them, Yu Shiriyue said with tears streaming down his face. Yu Yuanbi was his most favored grandson. Now that his son had failed to live up to expectations, the Yu family would have to rely on him in the future. Nothing could happen to him. Oh, loyal duke? What happened? Jining asked, knowing full well. AI, it's a long story. Yu Shiriyue sighed deeply. Then, he told Jining about how his eldest grandson, Yu Yuanbi, had been brooding over the death of his third grandson, Yu Xiong. Then, he said, the young man is hot-blooded and has begged this old man to make trouble for the loyal duke many times. But this old man prioritized the overall situation of the imperial court and naturally did not allow it. Who knew that he would secretly take action and bring people to make trouble for the loyal duke? And he hasn't returned yet. He must be at the Yang family manor in the southern part of the city. Eunuch Jin has a lot of face, so please help me save my grandson. The Yu clan will never forget such a great favor. After saying this, Yu Shiriyue was about to kneel again. Jining quickly stopped him. Lord Yu, don't be anxious. This is not a small matter. Please allow this eunuch to consider it carefully. Eunuch Jin, please help this old man. In the future, this old man will follow Eunuch Jin's lead. Seeing that Jining seemed to be hesitating, Yu Shiriyue was afraid that the other party would reject him, so he immediately made a heavy promise. The promise of a second-rank official was extremely important. Even Jining had to weigh the weight of this promise. He nodded and said, all right, let this eunuch think about it carefully. It's late today. Tomorrow, we'll go to the Yang family manor and ask for him. Jining couldn't refuse the loyalty of a minister, so he finally agreed. At this point, Yu Shiriyue also let out a long sigh of relief. Although he really wanted to go save his grandson now, the other party had already agreed. It wouldn't be good to rush him and make him unhappy. Yu Shiriyue left in the end. At this moment, he was looking forward to the arrival of dawn more than anyone else. However, for Yu Yuanbi, he had the same feeling. Every day felt like a year. He was used to being high and mighty. Even when he ate and dressed in the manor, he had servants to wait on him. But now, he was being hung up. The fear caused his nerves to be constantly tense. In addition, he had been shot and had lost a lot of blood. It didn't take long for him to feel sleepy. Every time this happened, there would be a loud noise by his ear, or cold water would be splashed on him, preventing him from falling asleep. Under this torment, Yu Yuanbi's thoughts entered a muddle-headed state. When someone asked him about it, He blurted out a lot of things in a daze. Even he himself didn't know what he was talking about when he said those things subconsciously. That's enough. Have you written it all down? Yang Lu, who was in charge of the interrogation, looked at the member of Cold Front who cooperated with him. I've written it all down. The member of Cold Front who passed the stenographer test put down his pen with a sense of accomplishment. Then, he looked at Yang Lu with a bright smile. He probably also knew that with what Yunbi had said, the so-called Great Ming Dynasty's Minister of Justice, Yu Shiyue, would definitely die. Okay, let's go see the young master. Yang Lu's eyes were also filled with excitement, as if he had done something great. Not long after, a few figures quietly left Yang Village. Not long after, the information they carried was sent to the security bureau in the capital. Then, it was distributed to the residences of several important officials in the imperial court. Who residents? There was no court session today. Ming woke up very early. Perhaps it was because he was old and didn't sleep as much, or perhaps it was because he felt that something was going to happen. Ming didn't know what exactly happened yesterday, but his son was one of the officials of the Embroidered Uniform Guard. Naturally, he knew a little about the Embroidered Uniform Guard and the East Military Depot moving people out of the city. Moreover, based on his many years of experience, he believed that this matter had something to do with his grandson-in-law. Ming didn't know how to evaluate Yang Chendong. He was young, talented, knowledgeable in military affairs and business. He had relied on himself to win the title of Duke before the age of 20. Even when the Great Ming was founded, no one had been able to do such a thing. Just from these aspects alone, this grandson-in-law was very satisfactory. With this sort of in-law, the Hu clan would have no worries for at least several decades. Moreover, from the information he had gathered from various sources, his relationship with his granddaughter Yenner was extremely good. The husband and wife respected each other and loved each other very much. It was impossible to find any fault with this. This sort of grandson-in-law could be said to be 1 in 10,000, or even 1 in 100,000. It was precisely because he was too young that he showed off his ability. Because of his great achievements, he had earned the emperor's suspicion, and he had repeatedly offended others in the imperial court, becoming the target of public criticism several times. At first, Hu Shao thought that Yang Chendong had done this on purpose. He didn't want to have a good relationship with the important officials in the imperial court so that he could tell Daizong Zhu Qiyu that he didn't have the intention of starting a faction and that he didn't want to form a small faction. You can rest assured. With this thought, Ming was greatly relieved, believing that this was the result of him becoming an official. His many years of experience in the imperial court told him that imperial favor was vast and mighty, but imperial favor could also make a person fall from heaven to hell. Chapter 328. As time passed, this impression slowly changed, and Hu Shao began to have more thoughts. This grandson-in-law did not make friends with important officials not because he wanted to clear his name, nor was it to show off to others. It seemed that he truly did not want to make friends with them, and even seemed to look down on these important officials. As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, Hu Shao was given a fright. He had seen many arrogant people, and there were countless people who thought they were talented when they were young. Because they were too smart, they always looked down on others. Such people were lonely. However, this kind of thinking was not desirable, because reality would tell them that if they did not work together and rely on others, they would never be able to do anything. However, in Yang Chendong's eyes, this was not the case. He was an expert who could do things without relying on others. For example, the establishment of the immortal abode and heavens beyond heaven did not rely on other factions. Yang Bao's establishment was even before he had made a name for himself. Later on, the Yang family bank became a hot topic, and its influence spread far and wide without anyone's help. Even Hu Shao, an elder who was related to him by blood, did not even ask for help. Yet, he had done these things. Not only that, he had done so well. Even though he had been suppressed a while ago, he had managed to survive without any major chaos. He was an oddity among oddities, yet he could do everything well. Even if Hu Shao wanted to find fault with him, or even lecture him as an elder, he could not find a suitable reason. This made Hu Shao feel vexed. Perhaps it was because he had seen too many beneficial things in his life. Back when young Chendong wanted to marry his granddaughter, he had thought that young Chendong wanted to borrow his power. At the time, it was not just him. Many people thought this way as well. Young Chendong wanted to borrow his power, so how could Hu Shao not think the same? If the Hu clan wanted to develop, if they wanted to have good fortune, and if they wanted to continue, they also needed a strong alliance. In addition, his granddaughter, Hu Yin, was also very fond of this marriage, so he had agreed after deep thought. For this reason, who knew how many people in the capital envied him? However, all of this changed on the day of their wedding. On the same day, Yang Chendong not only married Hu Yin, but also took in 3 concubines. Even though he had said that he had discussed this matter with the Hu clan, only Hu Shao knew that he had been completely unaware of this matter from beginning to end. This was tantamount to slapping his old face, but he couldn't say anything about it. He couldn't tell others that he didn't know anything. If he did, wouldn't he be slapping himself in the face? He suppressed the anger in his heart, thinking that in the future, when Yang Chendong came to ask him for help, he must give him a good beating. He had waited for such an opportunity for a long time, but Yang Chendong had never once asked him for it. On the contrary, they would send a lot of priceless gifts during festivals. Because of this, the Hu clan became even more prosperous. Some of the younger generation and side branches in the bureaucracy naturally benefited from this. They no longer needed to rack their brains and rely on their positions and power to do things they didn't want to do. On the contrary, this allowed them to establish themselves more upright and flourish in the bureaucracy. Normally, an official clan would have the support of a large financial group behind them. However, there was no one like Yang Chendong, who only gave and didn't ask for anything in return. As a result, the Hu clan could do things more openly. Even if an enemy wanted to make trouble for them, it would be difficult for them to find a reason. Because of their selflessness, many of the Hu clan's officials were more upright. With just a little bit of effort, it wasn't difficult for them to rise up the ranks. The eldest son, Hu Changning, had also been promoted because of Yang Chendong, and now, he had even caught the emperor's eye. All of this was because of Yang Chendong's help. Over time, the Hu clan no longer treated Yang Chendong as a junior who relied on the shade of a large tree. Instead, they viewed him as a colossus on the same level as them. Changes were constantly occurring, and Hu Shao began to place more of his attention on this matter. Giving without receiving anything in return would always make people feel uneasy, and this made them even more concerned. Naturally, the imperial court would protect Yang Chendong's interests. This was the only thing Hu Shao could do. It could be considered a return for what he had received. When yesterday's incident came out, and it happened in the southern part of the city, Hu Shao couldn't help but wonder if it had something to do with his grandson-in-law. If it had something to do with him, why hadn't there been any news yet? Could it be a small matter? But since the embroidered uniform guards had made a move first, and the Eastern Palace guards had made a move later, how could it be a small matter? Hu Shao, who hadn't slept well the entire night, was puzzled. Finally, he heard footsteps behind him. Ninger, why don't you sleep a little longer? Hearing the footsteps, he knew that his eldest son, Hu Changning, had arrived. Hu Shao slowly turned his head, and a kind expression appeared on his face. Father, there's news? Hu Changning didn't answer. In reality, he had been awakened by a sudden incident. When the city gates opened in the morning, the security bureau had brought over a set of documents. He hadn't woken up yet, but when he saw the documents and records in his hands, all his sleepiness disappeared, and he hurried over to find his father. Hu Zhao's expression didn't change, but his hand had already reached out, indicating that he valued this matter. As the documents fell into his hands, he slowly read them. Finally, his expression changed. Sensing that his father was digesting the contents of the documents, Hu Changning carefully said, "The person who came is Chen Dong's trusted aide. He also sent over a handwritten letter. Give it to me." Just as he was thinking about the importance of this matter, Hu Shao didn't hold back when his son said this. He reached out again, and a letter was unfolded in front of him. Hu Zhangning read the letter word by word. After a while, he closed the letter and slowly closed his eyes. The documents recorded evidence of the crimes of the Minister of Justice, Yu Shiyue. Attached were some questions that his eldest grandson, Yu Yunbi, had personally explained. Yu Yunbi was Yu Shiyue's successor, and because of this identity, he was usually involved in many core and confidential matters. One of them was only known to his own family. Yu Shiriyue had secretly sent someone to contact Zhu Qijin of the Ying sect, who was in the south. The general idea was that once something happened to the Dai sect, he would seek refuge there. This idea of having a foot in two boats wasn't wrong. In fact, it was the right choice in troubled times. However, the problem was that some things could be done, but others couldn't know about it. Once others found out, those who wholeheartedly wanted to serve two masters would often end up empty-handed, or even lose their heads. As a ruler, he could tolerate the selfishness of his subjects and seek benefits for himself. However, this kind of behavior that didn't completely submit to him was absolutely intolerable. When Hu Xiao saw this, he knew that Yu Shiriyue wouldn't be able to get past this obstacle. The result of touching the dragon's reverse scale was obvious. Hu Xiao didn't speak for a long time. Hu Changning, who was beside him, carefully asked, "Father, this is the minister of the imperial court. Why is Chen Dong forcing him to his death?" Hu Changning hadn't seen young Qindong's private letter before, so he naturally didn't know the reason. His thoughts were still stuck on the idea that since they were all important officials in the imperial court, it would be better to cover up for each other and find a good relationship. Beating someone to death like this would only make others wary of you and alienate you. This wasn't what a wise person would do. When Hu Xiao heard the question, he let out a long sigh and said, "Go take a look for yourself. Your son-in-law wants to go south to take a look. He's killing the chicken to warn the monkey before he leaves, reminding everyone. No, it should be said that he's directly killing the monkey." In the morning at Yang Village, an unexpected guest arrived. The head eunuch, the official most trusted by the emperor, the head eunuch and head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, Jin Ying, had arrived. Yang Qindong naturally knew why Jin Ying had come so early in the morning. After meeting Jin Ying in the side hall, without waiting for him to speak, the documents that had been sent to Hu Zhao's residence were placed on the table. When Jin Ying picked them up one by one and read through them, especially when it was written that Yu Shiriyue had privately contacted Zhu Qijin and expressed his loyalty. It was also written that the correspondence was in a secret room in Yu Shiriyue's study. Jin Ying's face burned with anger. Originally, he had come with the intention of interceding on Yu Shiriyue's behalf. Everyone was in the imperial court and would see each other frequently, so it was good for everyone. Most importantly, he had the loyalty of a minister. With his position at the emperor's side, he would play a crucial role. But now, he didn't dare to say anything, much less ask for mercy. Being at Zhu Qiyu's side, Jin Ying naturally knew what the emperor liked and disliked. Yu Shiriyue's two-mindedness was already intolerable to Daizong. In other words, Yu Shiriyue had been abandoned from this moment on. Next would be the extermination of his family. At this moment, interceding on Jin Ying's behalf was an unwise act. Jin Ying was so smart. Why would he speak up? This Yu Shiriyue is really hateful. Duke of loyalty and courage, don't worry. With these things, I will immediately send people to search you manor. I will definitely punish him severely. He gritted his teeth and looked angry. At this moment, Jin Ying's performance was perfect. Those who didn't know would never have thought that he was still thinking about offending Yu Shiriyue when he came. Jin Ying's attitude was completely within Yang Qindong's expectations. Then let's report this to the emperor and handle it. With just one sentence, Yang Qindong also expressed his thoughts. He would not suppress this matter. Even if Jin Ying wanted to cover up for Yu Shiriyue, he would announce everything to the public. At that time, it would only implicate even more people who spoke up for the Yu family. After knowing Yang Qindong's attitude, Jin Ying understood that there was no turning back. However, he was even more curious. With these things in his hands, if it were him, he would have many options. For example, he could threaten Yu Shiriyue and then use him for his own purposes. But why did Yang Qindong insist on making the matter public and putting Yu Shiriyue to death? Chapter 329. Did he not know that this would easily cause the other officials to panic? After all, who hadn't done something wrong before? If that was the case, it would arouse everyone's vigilance and even cause them to band together in opposition. Wouldn't that mean that their future path would become narrower and narrower? Jin Ying had far too many questions. Fortunately, Yang Qindong spread out his words, and gave an explanation that made the other party feel a sense of sudden realization. Eunuch Jean, my deceased father's birthday is approaching. Last year was supposed to be the 10th anniversary of his death, but the Walla army truly was present, so we were unable to leave. Fortunately, the situation of the country has stabilized, and this duke has received His Majesty's great favor and has been granted the title of loyal and courageous, but in reality, I have been granted a fief of Janning residence. Thinking about it, it's been so long since I've brought Madam to see it, so it's best to end this matter together, young Chendong said in a rather sorrowful tone, his eyes seeming to be reminiscing about something. Speaking of which, Jining also knew young Rome. Strictly speaking, they had spent a long time in the same court. And now that young Chendong was speaking of filial piety, Jining had nothing to say. Yes, filial piety is the foundation of a person, but which madam will the Duke of Loyal and Courageous be bringing with you? Of course, the official wife. Yang Chendong said matter-of-factly, and then he added, that's right, there's also third madam, Lady Shui. She's always yearned for the atmosphere of the South, so this duke promised her long ago that she would come with us. Without waiting for Jean Ying to say anything, Yang Chendong continued, of course, this duke's roots are still in the capital. This is my business, and second madam and fourth madam will remain behind to manage it. When the time comes, I ask that eunuch Jean take care of it. This duke will be endlessly grateful. Jean Ying's expression had already become extremely nervous, but when he heard the last part, he clearly relaxed. And seeing Yang Chendong so courteous, he cupped his fist and replied, Duke of Loyal and Courageous, please be at ease. But if there's anything you need, you can order someone to come find this duke. I will do my best. Many thanks, many thanks. Yang Chendong cupped his fist in thanks, and the two seemed to have a very pleasant conversation. About an hour later, Jean Ying left Yangjia village. What was different from when he came was that there were a few more banknotes in his bosom, totaling up to 200,000 taels. Come to think of it, almost every time Jean Ying came to Yang Chendong, as long as she wasn't looking for trouble, she would receive many benefits. Moreover, she would receive many benefits. From this, it could be seen that Yang Chendong knew how to conduct himself. The carriages left the Yang Chendong manor. Jean Ying, who was in the carriage, slowly closed her eyes. Her mind was filled with what Yang Chendong had just said. Now that she had a clear understanding of what had happened, Jean Ying didn't know how to describe Yueyu's actions. After thinking about it for a long time, he could only think of one word, and that was overestimating himself. Just because he had lost a round in the previous battle, he had been brooding over it. Now that he finally had the chance, he wanted to kill the other party. If things weren't done beautifully, and you weren't prepared enough, and the worst thing was that what you were doing wasn't clean, what kind of ending would happen to you was already destined. This was why Yang Chendong had angrily attacked. But now, it seemed that this person had a sense of propriety. Not only had he targeted Yueyue, he had also produced ample evidence. At the same time, he had stated that he would be leaving the capital for a period of time. This was clearly to alleviate the pressure and influence of this matter on the officials. At the very least, Jean Ying was in favor of Yang Chendong leaving for a period of time. At this time, the army was being mobilized and the imperial power was being tightened. With Yang Chendong around, it gave people a sense of awe, and without him, many things would go much more smoothly. Moreover, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage had said that this would be his base. When he left, he would only take the first madam and third madam, leaving the second madam and fourth madam behind as hostages. In this way, there was no need to worry that he would do anything to harm Bai Ming. With this thought in mind, Jean Ying's complexion improved, and her lips naturally curved into a smile. In the imperial palace of the capital, although there was no court session today, the temporary emperor was still extremely busy. Many memorials awaited his approval, and many important matters of state and military required his final decision. Perhaps this was the emperor's mission. He was destined to toil for the rest of his life. However, even if that was the case, many people only saw the scene of him grasping great power and controlling life and death in his hands. They did not see how much he had paid for it and how much happiness he should have given up in his life. In Celestial Worship Palace, Zhu Qiyu was burying his head in a small mountain of memorials, his face occasionally calm and occasionally tinged with anger. There were quite a few minor eunuchs in the hall. They carefully stood there, their bodies slightly bowed as if they were ready to receive orders at any time. But they truly did not dare to make the slightest noise, as if they were afraid of alarming the emperor and incurring the wrath of the dragon. Then, footsteps came from outside the hall. When all the eunuchs' expressions became more respectful, Zhu Qiyu, who was immersed in his work, slowly raised his head. After a casual glance, he continued to read the memorials in his hands. He said, "Official Jin has returned. Long live the emperor! Long live the emperor!" As usual, after Jining knelt and paid her respects, she stood up and carefully walked to the front. She walked to Zhu Qiyu's side and said softly, "Your Majesty, there has been a change in the situation." "HM?" Zhu Qiyu seemed to have heard her, but also seemed not to have heard her. At least, he did not do anything out of the ordinary. But Jining, who was used to serving him, knew that Zhu Qiyu had completely listened. She continued in a small voice, "Your Majesty, Yu Shiyue is suspected of treason." "HM?" As if suddenly awakened, Zhu Qiyu abruptly turned his head. He glared fiercely at Jining and said, "Qing, say that again." Jining knelt on the ground with a thump. As if she was frightened, she continued, "Your Majesty, Yu Shiyue has secretly contacted Zhu Qizhen of the Ying sect. He has the intention to submit." Bastard! When he heard Zhu Qizhen's name, Zhu Qiyu's expression was clearly furious. But no one knew whether he was scolding Jining or Yu Shiyue. Because of Zhu Qiyu's anger, the temperature in Fengtian Hall seemed to have dropped. The other eunuchs bowed even lower. At this moment, it was so quiet that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. After about 3 or 4 breaths, Zhu Qiyu seemed to have adjusted his state of mind. His voice was no longer as frightening as before. Perhaps he had slowly begun to digest this news. "We have treated Yu Qing well. How could he do such a thing? Do you have sufficient evidence for this? This subject has just returned from Yang village. Everything was told by the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. I heard it from Yu Shiyue's eldest grandson, Yu Yunbi. It should not be false. But after all, this involves the position of minister." This subject did not dare to make any rash comments and did not send anyone to obtain evidence. "Send someone to get it. We want to see the evidence. We want to see the evidence." Zhu Qiyu's voice grew louder and louder as if his anger was rising. "Yes, this subject will send someone to do so. Your Majesty must take care of your health." Seeing that Zhu Qiyu was in a fit of rage, Jining knew that no matter what he said now, the other party would not believe him. He spoke as he retreated. He was not afraid. He just wanted to give the emperor time and space to digest this news. The emperor was also a person. He also had emotions. The so-called not showing his emotions usually referred to in front of outsiders, such as eunuchs. Usually, Zhu Qiyu would not fake it. Jining was well aware of this. That was why he retreated to give the emperor time to adjust. Of course, he also needed to obtain the evidence. Yu Manor. A night had passed. They had sent out all the men they could, but there were still no clues. At this time, as the master of the manor, the current Minister of Justice, Yu Shiyue, did not dare to have any expectations. He could only place everything on Jining. He hoped that this chief eunuch still had some face and could get Zhangsun Yuanbi back from the hands of the Duke of Loyalty. As for what kind of price he would have to pay, he was already prepared to be bitten. The entire manor became gloomy because of Yu Shiyue's mood. The servants walked carefully, as if they were afraid of doing something wrong and being caught in the crossfire. Many things could happen just because you did not want them to. Just like the Yu residents at this moment, although everyone was already very careful, what happened next still caught them off guard. A large number of embroidered uniform guards with embroidered spring sabers suddenly appeared. They quickly rushed into the residence and blocked the main passages in the courtyard. "What's going on? What's going on?" Yu Shiyue, who was sitting in the study waiting for Jining to send him news, felt the chaos outside. He stood up and looked outside with a nervous and confused expression. "Old Master, the embroidered uniform guards are here. They surrounded this place and said they want to search the house." After the chief eunuch pushed open the door to the study without permission, he stumbled and spoke in an unclear voice. "Get out of my way." Before the chief eunuch could explain the situation clearly, the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Ji Guang, who was dressed in a flying fish robe, followed behind him. When he saw that the chief eunuch still wanted to say something, he raised his leg and kicked him to the ground. "How dare you, Ji Guang? What are you doing? Don't think that just because you're from the embroidered uniform guards, I can't punish you. I'm going to report this to the emperor." Seeing her servant being beaten in front of her, how could Yu Shiyue, who had always been pampered and held a high position, tolerate it? She raised her voice and reprimanded loudly, as if she wanted to put a lot of pressure on the other party. Chapter 330. Yu Shiyue was the Minister of Justice. With the abolition of the cabinet, the Minister of Justice could answer directly to the emperor. He was the highest-ranking official. In addition, he was promoted by the substitute emperor, Zhu Qiyu, and was deeply trusted. He also had a good relationship with the other ministers. Even Jin Ing was considered one of his own. With such an environment, such popularity, and such a network of connections, it was no wonder that Yu Shiyue still dared to question the embroidered uniform guards loudly with an expression of condemnation. However, Yu Shiyue was too agitated. He didn't think about it. Without orders from above, how could the brocade guard dare to make a move on an important official like him? Since they were here, they must have been on the emperor's orders. Ji Guang looked at Yu Shiyue, who was jumping up and down, as if he was looking at a clown. He shook his head disdainfully. "Lord Yu, this official only knows that I'm here to investigate under orders. Please cooperate. As for whether you want to lodge a complaint or not, it's up to you. Men, search." As his voice fell, he waved his hand, and several embroidered uniform guards behind him rushed into the study like wolves and tigers. Then, according to the information they had received, they quickly found the secret door. The mechanism moved, and a secret compartment appeared. A few well-preserved letters were displayed in front of everyone. These letters were evidence of Yu Shiyue's private contact with Zhu Qijin of Ing sect. Logically speaking, they should be destroyed. However, Yu Shiyue wanted to keep a copy. If there was a day when he had no way out and went to the south, at least it would be a testimony that he had been considered a member of Ing sect for a long time. This evidence could have given him another life of glory and wealth. At this moment, it had become the driving force for him to go to hell. Therefore, when he saw these letters appear and was about to be taken by the brocade guard, he went crazy. He rushed forward like a madman, wanting to snatch them back and destroy them. Ji Guang, who had long been prepared for this move, simply grabbed his shoulder with his large hand and said in a joking tone, "Lord Yu, what are you trying to do? Could it be that you really have something to hide?" Yu Shiyue knew that it was impossible for him to take it by force when he felt the large hand holding him down like an iron clamp. Immediately, he changed into another face and said to Ji Guang, "Lord Ji, I'll return it to you. I'll give you whatever you want. I can give you all of my property. It's priceless. How about it?" At this moment, Yu Shiyue seemed to want to bribe Ji Guang. From the looks of it, this was the only way to go. Otherwise, once these letters were sent to Daizong, it was easy to imagine what would happen to them. Who wouldn't be tempted by such priceless wealth? If it was a private investigation, there might be some unforeseen circumstances. But this time, there were so many embroidered uniform guards, and they were acting under the emperor's orders. How could Ji Guang dare to make any mistakes? Looking at Yu Shiyue, who was begging for mercy, he shook his head coldly. "Lord Yu, if you knew this would happen, you wouldn't have done it in the first place. Hey, someone come. Take Lord Yu away and keep an eye on him. Don't let him commit suicide." Yes. A few tall and sturdy embroidered uniform guards walked over and wrapped Yu Shiyue up. Immediately, the entire Yu residence fell into a state of chaos. The movements in the Yu residence naturally couldn't be hidden from the other officials. In line with the idea that the fox grieves for the rabbit's death, and in line with the principle that without the lips, the teeth would feel cold, Governor Shi Hong, Minister of War Ming, Minister of Revenue Jin Lian, Minister of Works Shi Pu, and the other officials hurried to the palace. Although they didn't know what exactly happened, They more or less guessed that it had something to do with the Duke of Loyalty. They couldn't understand why the Emperor would help others deal with them. Thus, they all thought about what to say when they saw the Emperor and how to dissuade him from doing something that would hurt those close to him and make his enemies happy. The group of officials quickly arrived outside the throne room, but they weren't immediately received by the Emperor. Instead, when they stood outside the room, they could hear the angry roars coming from inside the room. At this moment, the expressions of the officials who came to plead for leniency were very unsightly. All of them exchanged glances. They all thought that the situation was serious. It seemed that the Emperor was truly angry, and the situation was difficult to turn around. After about an hour, the movements in the hall grew quieter and quieter. Not long after, the chief eunuch, Jean Ying, walked out. When her gaze fell on the officials, she sighed softly and said, "Everyone, please come in. The Emperor wants to see you." Just from Jean Ying's expression, it could be seen that the situation wasn't good. However, now was not the time to ask about things. The officials immediately entered the throne room and saw Zhu Qiyu, who still had a furious expression on his face, glaring angrily at them from his dragon throne. Just from that gaze, the officials felt that the atmosphere wasn't right. Even so, they still forced themselves to kneel on the ground and loudly shouted, "Long live the Emperor." In the past, after greeting each other, Zhu Qiyu would say, "Rise," and everyone would rise. However, this time, he didn't say anything. The officials could only kneel there, unable to rise. Time seemed to stop here. There was no sound in the hall. Under this kind of atmosphere, the officials kneeling on the ground didn't dare to raise their heads to look. It was as if they were afraid of angering the Emperor. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Then, there was the sound of rushing wind. Following that, letters were thrown through the air and landed at the feet of the kneeling officials. Take a look. These are the so-called loyal officials. They received my trust and were entrusted with important tasks. Now, they turn around and do such a rebellious thing. They are truly unworthy of being an official, unworthy of being an official. Do you still want to plead for mercy on his behalf? Could it be that you are the same as him and have done such a rebellious thing? The letters flew everywhere. Soon, the officials reached out to pick them up. After glancing at them, they felt their scalps go numb. This was a letter that Emperor Yingzong had personally written to Yushuriwe. The officials could be considered old officials under Zhu Qizhen. Naturally, they wouldn't mistake the emperor's calligraphy. Knowing what this was, they also understood why Zhu Qiyu was so angry. They also understood that this time, Yushuriwe really couldn't be saved. As an official, wanting to serve two masters was originally intolerable, not to mention that his weakness had fallen into the hands of others. If he didn't die, who would die? The result was clear at a glance. No one was willing to say anything for Yushuriwe. On the contrary, everyone was thinking about how to make Zhu Qiyu believe them. They didn't want to be affected by this matter. Naturally, among the kneeling officials, there were also some who were like Yushuriwe. They had secretly sent messages to Zhu Qizhen. In the end, it was just to be safer. But those who did so were now covered in cold sweat. There were even some who learned from Yushuriwe and privately sent messages. They were already thinking that the first thing they would do when they returned home was to burn the letters. They didn't want to leave any evidence. None of the officials dared to say anything. One by one, they kowtowed to the ground and shouted that they were guilty. It was as if they wanted to repent and repent. Zhu Qiyu, who was sitting on the dragon throne, looked at this scene very seriously. He was very clear in his heart. He was afraid that even among these kneeling officials, there would still be some who were half-hearted. However, he couldn't kill them all. He had to give the imperial order, but in the end, he still needed to rely on them to do the actual work. If he killed whoever he suspected, wouldn't that mean he would become a commander without an army? However, since there were signs of something happening, he was unwilling to let it go so easily. This was the reason why he was doing this, to intimidate the enemy. Although Yushuriwe's betrayal made him burn with anger, it wasn't to this extent. After all, he was only a minister of justice. After killing him, there would be more suitable people to step forward. But he still pretended to be so angry in front of all the officials. It was to tell everyone that if anyone dared to do this in the future, the consequences would be severe. Seeing that everyone was saying that he was guilty, Zhu Qiyu felt the strength of imperial power. He felt that at this moment, his aura of a monarch could finally shake the world. Not only did you have to be ruthless and arbitrary in governing a country, but you also had to be humble. Blindly suppressing people for a long time would only lead to more backlash. This wasn't what a wise person would do. In the next breath, Emperor Daizong changed his face and said, "Officials, you may rise. I know that you are all loyal officials, completely different from Yushiyue. In the future, the great Ming dynasty will need to rely on us to govern together. Give a carrot after a stick." This set of extremely ancient governance methods was universal at any time. Just like now, after hearing Zhu Qiyu's words, all the officials in the throne room shed tears of gratitude. They kept praising the emperor's wisdom, saying that Daizong was the #1 emperor in all of history, and so on. After a wave of praise, it was time to do the actual thing. Many people criticized Yushiyue on the spot. There were even people who directly said that such an impure official should be beheaded in public as a warning. Of course, Yushiyue had to be killed. Not only that, they had to make a big scene as a warning to those officials who also had second thoughts. Zhu Qiyu had a clear understanding of this point. Of course, he approved the officials' requests. He also said that the Ministry of Justice, the Supreme Court, and the embroidered uniform guard would jointly investigate and announce his evil deeds to the world as a warning to everyone. Among the officials who pleaded for leniency, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Su Yozhun, was among them. He was probably the one who benefited the most out of these people. He took this opportunity to finally take a step forward and take over the Ministry of Justice's position. Even though he hadn't been promoted to the position of Minister of Justice yet, from the looks of it, it wouldn't be long before that day came. At this moment, while he was excited, he also felt a sense of fear towards the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chenong. He was able to get to where he was today because of his hard work, but more of it was because of Yang Chendong's plan. Now that he was finally going to obtain power, Su Yozhan's first thought was to be obedient. Otherwise, who knew if today's Yushiyue would be him tomorrow? Chapter 331. Zhu Qiyu was very satisfied with the performance of the officials and left happily. Leaving behind the 3 officials, the group of 5 discussed as they left the hall. Su Yozhan's side was even livelier. Shi Hong, Shi Pu, Ming, Jin Lian, and the others naturally gathered around him, congratulating him one after another. Su Yozhan accepted them one by one. He didn't mind building a good relationship with these people, and he believed that Yang Chendong would also be happy to see this. It was as if he had entered the tiger's den. Yushiyue's matter seemed to have been settled. With that handwritten letter as evidence, no one would be able to reverse the situation. Since they couldn't shake him, everyone chose to draw a clear line between them and hit him while he was down. In a short period of time, more and more of Yushiyue's crimes were revealed to the public. Even the family members of the guilty official, Li Wanshao, were dug up, and evidence of Yushiyue's crimes were brought out. But relatively speaking, this was just a stone in the well. After his private contact with Zhu Qijin was exposed, his fate was already sealed. From Yu Xiong's death to Yushiyue's imprisonment, it had only been a few months since the Yu clan's defeat. Anyone who knew the inside story knew that while it was one thing to seek death, it was more to do with loyalty. For a moment, Yang Chendong couldn't help but become the target of public criticism. Fortunately, he had already prepared a countermeasure. At this moment, he was packing up his things and preparing to leave the capital. Yushiyue's case was in its final stages. With the tacit approval of Daizong and Zhu Qiyu, the consequences could already be imagined. Yu Yuanbi was also released by Yang Chendong. The pitiful young master thought that he could be saved, but he didn't expect that as soon as he arrived at the Yongding Gate, he would be captured by the constables of the Ministry of Justice who used to smile at him. These constables, who used to look up to Yu Yuanbi when they saw him, suddenly changed their expressions, as if they were fiends who had walked out from the depths of hell. With such a huge matter and the collapse of a minister, Yang Chendong knew that he had to leave the capital. Otherwise, if he continued to stay here, who knew how many people would be concerned about him? Although he had Long Feng by his side and his safety wouldn't be a problem for the time being, it was hard to predict what would happen if a string was stretched too taut. He would never do something as stupid as putting himself in the center of a whirlpool. When the matter was done, he left with a flick of his sleeve, concealing his achievements and fame. This was what a wise man should do. Fortunately, the acting ancestor emperor already knew about his departure, and judging from his attitude, he was very much in favor of it. No matter what, Yang Chundong's existence was a kind of pressure. Although he couldn't see it, he could feel it. If this person could leave for a while, not only would the influence of Yushiyue's incident fade, but it would also allow the emperor to do more things without any distractions. With the emperor's tacit approval, the news that Yang Chundong would be leaving for a period of time was made public in the Yang family manor. First, it was the Yang Family Academy, where the first batch of students was about to graduate. Originally, there were a total of 101 students, including Junko, but only 48 of them were able to persist until the end. There was no lack of outstanding students who were eliminated at the very end. Although less than half of them had graduated, Yang Chundong was still extremely satisfied. He was extremely concerned about their placement, even going so far as to speak with each of the 48 students to understand their thoughts and make the most appropriate arrangements. For example, Feng Ku, who had once been a destitute scholar, was extremely intelligent and quick-witted. He was often very interested in the topics Yang Chundong taught in his classes, especially physics and chemistry, and the things that people regarded as craftsmen. He was able to deduce many things from one example. In the great Ming dynasty, scholar officials and the emperor ruled the world together, and Confucianism was the most sacred. Only scholars, who spoke of the etiquette of sages, were regarded as above men. In comparison, even generals who were skilled in war were inferior. And this was even less true of craftsmen. With this sort of hobby, one was destined to have no better future. Because of this, Feng Ku had been distressed more than once. Now that Yang Chundong was here, everything was different. When Yang Chundong asked Feng Ku to come to the study for a private talk, Feng Ku told him that there was a place where craftsmen enjoyed a high status and had a good environment, as well as many unimaginable experimental instruments. Before Yang Chundong could say anything, Feng Ku expressed his willingness to go. He even said that as long as he could realize what he had learned and imagined, he was willing to go no matter how desolate that place was. In this way, Feng Ku was arranged to go to Qiqian City, where he would first be assigned to work in the arsenal. As for his future development, it would depend on his personal ability. Chang Qianhao, the son of the Chang family from Jiangnan. He was very proficient in business. After many days of learning, Yang Chundong used his personal charm to infect this person, making him one of his staunch followers. This time, he would follow Yang Chundong to the south. If there was a chance, he would naturally expand the Yang family's business. Although Tai Qingyi and Jiang Ping were women, their martial arts foundation was very good. After half a year of learning, they performed well in all aspects, and were left to be the bodyguards of the madams. In the study, Yang Chundong took out two seemingly very small Browning women's pistols. Both Tai Qingyi and Jiang Ping had dabbled in pistols before. They had even shot targets when they were students and had good results. They had yearned for such an advanced weapon for a long time. Now that they finally had their own pistols, they were very excited. There was also Wang Si. Because his grandfather was the current Minister of Personnel and was in charge of the promotion and evaluation of all the officials in the world, he had an important position. Yang Chundong kept him and let him become a teacher in the Yang Clan Academy to continue his teaching and nurture more talents that could be used in the future. Wang Si had some objections to this. After he knew that Yang Chundong was going to the south, he wanted to go with him. His teacher had said before that it was better to travel 10,000 miles than to read 10,000 books. For this matter, Yang Chundong talked with him in private for more than 2 hours and said that this was still a test for him. As long as he passed, there would be a day when he would be released, and he would be entrusted with important tasks. Wang Si didn't know what it meant to be entrusted with an important task. However, since his teacher was the one who said it, he naturally wouldn't doubt it and agreed. He also said that with him there, the Yang family village would be fine and that his teacher could leave without worry. The group of students were arranged according to their strengths and characteristics. After the matter of the academy was settled, Yang Fu, who was in charge of the Yang family's business, was also called to the Yang family village. Yang Fu was Yang Qindong's cousin. The two of them had worked together many times in Jianing. The reason why Yang Qindong could be where he was today was because of the various resources provided by Yang Fu. Of course, in return, Yang Fu was now in charge of the Heavens Beyond Trading Company, the Yang family's bank, and the trade with the Northern Wall. He had great authority, and the benefits he received were also very generous. After receiving benefits, Yang Fu respected Yang Qindong even more. After being summoned, he dropped everything in his hands and rushed over. The two of them talked in the study for a long time. Then, Yang Fu left in high spirits. Not long after Yang Fu left, he returned to the capital and went to find Wu Qingbo, who was now the military governor, Shi Heng. He said that he was willing to pay a sum of money to ask the other party to send an army to protect the business. In particular, the trade with the Walla was the most important. According to Yang Qindong's intentions, once he left, Lung Feng wouldn't be able to participate too much in protecting the caravan with Walla. Due to the lack of military strength, the original company of protection troops had to be reduced to a squad. The reduction of military strength required other people to take over. Thus, he locked his gaze on Shi Heng. Yang Qindong also firmly believed that the other party would be more than happy to receive such benefits that fell from the sky. It was just as he had expected. Yang Fu took the initiative to look for him. When Shi Heng knew of his intentions, he was naturally excited. In order to express his modesty, he said that he would consider it carefully. However, after Yang Fu left for an afternoon, at night, he arranged for his trusted family member, his cousin, Shi Tong, to look for Yang Fu. In the following days, this person would be responsible for the safety of the trade caravan. He would bring 1,000 men with him. Protecting the trade caravan would not only allow him to obtain a generous amount of mercenaries, but more importantly, he could also bring in his own private goods to trade. The profits from this could be 10 times, or even dozens of times more. Once this was done, Shi Heng would have more and more money at his disposal, and his influence would also grow. The matters outside were arranged one by one. To Yang Qindong, dealing with such matters was very simple. As long as his thinking was correct, it would not be difficult to do it. However, the following arrangements for the madams gave him the biggest headache. According to what Jining had said before, he could not take all of the madams with him. Taking 2 and leaving 2 behind meant that his home was still here. It could also be said that he was leaving behind hostages. First Madame Hu Yin and third Madame Shui, who were called along, were naturally happy and delighted. Second Madame Qiao Yin and fourth Madame Lady Xiang, who were not called, were naturally not in a good mood. This was especially true for Qiao Yin. She had been Yang Qindong's personal maid before and had never left the young master's side since she was young. Even during the trip to Crimson City, she had followed him all the way. Now that they were suddenly separated, it was easy to imagine how reluctant she was to part with him. For this reason, Yang Qindong accompanied Qiao Yin alone for the entire night. Under the dual attack of actions and words, Qiao Yin was finally persuaded. Not to mention actions, Qiao Yin practically spent the rest of the night begging for mercy. In terms of words, he said, people will eventually grow up. I already have 4 madams, so I have more to take care of in terms of basic necessities. Qiao Yin does not have to be as busy as before. This separation is also for the sake of better reunion in the future. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.